Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto was sent to Rising of the Shield Hero. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by RaiderXV, link in the description and support Rider. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Welcome to Malmormark. Naruto Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox. Genin of Konoha. Student of Jiraiya of the Sannin. Number 1 Unpredictable Ninja of the Leaf. Student of Kakashi of the Sharingan. Naruto and Jiraiya were on the training trip and he had just turned 15. The pair had just raided an old temple library on the Suna-Konoha border. They had claimed many scrolls and books. Naruto had found one that had caught his eye and wanted to read it while they walked to their next destination. Naruto looked at the title of the book and said, "The Record of the Four Holy Weapons." This book starts in another world with an apocalyptic prophecy. It tells about waves of catastrophe. Jiraiya chuckled and said, "Sounds interesting. Keep reading. You need to keep up your studies and the script looks a little on the old side and this will help with your reading ability." Naruto shrugs and continues to narrate the book to Jiraiya to stave off the waves the people this world will call upon heroes from other worlds. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow and said, "Just so long as they don't call upon you. We need you here." Naruto laughed and said, "It's only a book. It's not like it's really going to happen." Well anyways, Sword Hero, seems like an annoying guy, but okay. Bow Hero, sort of a hero complex. Spear Hero man, what an idiot, this princess sounds like a real evil one. Jiraiya chuckles and says, "The second vice of the shinobi, women. Watch out for them. If they come on too strong be very careful and keep them under constant watch. For they will be nothing but trouble. Sort of like that girl you left in the village." Naruto looked at his sensei with an annoyed look. Being only 15 years old and not really understanding girls, he shrugged his shoulders and then set down the book. He finished packing up the camp and gathering up the supplies into the packs. Both men then began to set off towards their next destination. He then picked up his book and began to read again. The Last Hero, Shield Hero. A shield that isn't even a weapon. Jiraiya chuckled and said, "There are some stories of shields being weapons, but they are few and far between." Naruto then continued, "Hey, wait a minute, why are the pages blank?" Jiraiya looks at Naruto and quickly grabs him as the boy begins to glow. He then looks into his eyes and says, "You're being summoned." Naruto nodded as they continued down a lit tunnel. "When we get there, I'm going to disappear. I'll contact you within a day." Naruto nodded as the tunnel appeared to end. Naruto appeared on a summoning circle in a crouch. He noticed 3 others and Jiraiya missing in the circle. He also noticed the others had weapons, specifically a sword, bow and a spear, while he had a shield on his right arm. He then noticed several acolytes and one exclaimed, "Oh saint heroes of old. Please help save our world." The boy with dark hair and the sword replied, "Forget it." The boy with blonde hair and the bow also replied, "I also refuse." The one with the spear said authoritatively, "You can send us back to our homeworld, right? Do that and maybe we'll talk." Naruto watched and kept quiet. The one possessing the sword pointed at the priests and exclaimed, "You brought the 4 of us here without our consent. Don't you even feel the least bit guilty about it?" The bow wielder then continued, "Not to mention if we do all that work to restore peace and you throw us out. We'd have done all that work for nothing." The spear guy asked, "How willing are you to accommodate our requests? Depending on your answer we may end up as your enemies rather and your allies." Naruto scowled but looked between the 2 groups. He understood the demands of the heroes. As a shinobi he understood about being paid for his work but also wanted to do the right thing. The priest smiled and replied, "Good sirs, before I say any more, I would like you to have an audience with the king of Malmormark. You can negotiate your rewards with him directly. So please." The sword hero lowered his sword and replied, "Fine." The bow hero continued, "I suppose we will consider their offer." The spear hero continued, "Sure, it doesn't matter who we talk to, our demands won't change." The 3 began to leave the room. Naruto did several hand signals and left the room knowing that Jiraiya got the message. As they continued through the castle the boys commented about it being a different world. Naruto kept quiet but noticed that the air had changed and touched his shuriken but felt a shock and saw a warning in his vision saying that the weapon was forbidden for attack purposes and only to use those of his class. He figured that he could only use shields. He thought, "This sucks. I hope I can use jutsu. Since shuriken and kunai are out of the question. I might be able to use them in traps though." He continued to follow the group into a chamber filled with guards in unusual armor and clothing that he didn't recognize. At the end of the chamber was a man sitting in one of 2 chairs wearing opulent clothing and jewelry. Naruto noticed the quick look of anger that flashed across the man's face when he looked at him, but Naruto didn't react. The man began to speak, "So you 4 young men are the 4 cardinal heroes of legend. This is the land of Malmormark and I am her king, Alcray Malmormark the XXXII. Welcome brave heroes. Please identify yourselves." The sword hero steps forward and says boldly, "Renamaki, I'm a high school student and I'm 16 years old. The spear hero steps forward and says, I'm Motoyasu Kitamura, college student, 21. The bow hero sighs and responds, I suppose I'm up next. Itsuki Kawasumi, still in high school and I'm 17. Naruto steps forward, but the king speaks, good, Ren, Motoyasu, and Itsuki. I'll explain why we brought you here. My beloved country of Mulmormark and the entire world surrounding it are heading down the road to certain ruin. Naruto kept his mouth shut during the explanation, but glared at the king the whole time. He then found out about how this world had an old apocalyptic prophecy about waves of destruction assaulting this world. The first wave had already come, and kingdom had been assaulted by the wave of destruction. The kingdom had barely survived the wave, but through the help of adventurers and the knights of the kingdom they had survived. After a feast held in their honor, they had retired to what was Naruto's room. The others had regaled him with stories of how this world was like video game worlds from their respective worlds. Naruto had told them that his world really didn't have games like they described. He also noticed that someone was listening at the door, and he smirked at this. The other three figured that they came from different versions of the same world, while Naruto had come from one that was completely different. Naruto shrugged. He asked all he could about gaming systems from them, and they gave little in the way of helpful information. They also called him useless since he was a shielder. He just shrugged and listened to them until they left to their own rooms. The listener had left and Jiraiya had landed on the patio. He asked, so what do you think? Jiraiya shook his head and replied, I have no clue. I can't understand anything anyone says. Naruto then says, how about joining my party? Jiraiya looked at the boy in surprise and asked, what? He then saw a message appear in front of him. Ask, would you like to join the Shield Heroes party? Yes, no. He looked intently at yes and decided to select yes. Suddenly Naruto's name came up and under his name with several lines below his name and his. Naruto then explained, I hate reading, but I can listen and read at the same time, and the king was rather boring. We're both level 1. The red line is hit points, the blue is mana points, the green one is SP or special points, and the yellow one, CP, is chakra points. Jiraiya interrupted, wait SP? I don't have that one. Naruto sighed and replied, must be special to the heroes. Also touch the gem and then touch your throat. Jiraiya did as told. You will now understand everyone around you from this world. I've been using the help as much as I can to see what I can do. Jiraiya chuckled and smiled. He then said, I knew you were smart in there. Now how do you want to do this? Naruto sighed and replied, with how the king reacted I'm thinking that I'm going to be betrayed. Somehow, someway. I don't know this world, but they don't know that I'm better equipped than any of these clowns for combat. Even without a weapon, but it looks like I'm stuck with just the shield. I can use sharp weapons as tools, but not as weapons. So, take my shuriken and most of my kunai. Hide in the shadows and find out what you can. I know that you can do that normally, but I think that it will be helpful for both of us if you do. He then explained all he knew about this world and gave Jiraiya all the food in the room and most of the equipment in his pack. The next morning, he was guided by the woman in the yellow dress, but he noticed her gait was not that of a noble woman, but that of a trained woman, either a shinobi or a warrior. He just stored that information for later. Naruto then entered the hall with the other heroes to see a group of warriors in front of the king. The king then said, we have gathered the greatest warriors in the land. These brave souls will fight the wave alongside you. Naruto thought to himself, will we choose them, or will they choose us? The Redeed is kind of cute. At that thought the Redeed smiled at him. The king continued, our future champions. The time has come to begin your journey. Naruto watched closely as the group of assembled adventurers walked forward and began to assemble behind the heroes. He looked behind himself and sighed. He knew this would happen. He looked at the Redeed and figured watching her and 3 other girls assemble behind Motoyasu. He then thought, even if someone comes over afterwards. They initially didn't pick me. Thus I have to do it on my own like usual. Naruto shrugged and didn't say anything, since he figured it would fall on deaf ears. The king then declared, I'm loath to admit it, but even I'm surprised that this was the outcome. Motoyasu smiled and said, see, being a shielder is bad luck. Naruto shook his head and replied, nah, I'm guessing there is more to it than that. The king then said, it has come to my attention that the shield hero has no knowledge of our world, even though the heroes are said to come to our world with innate knowledge of our world. I guess this rumor has spread and is the reason that the shield hero has no followers. Naruto shrugs and says, I'll just have to deal with it. The Redeed in the background raises her hand and says, Sir Hero. Would you kindly allow me to change parties and allow me to join the shield hero? Motoyasu asked, are you sure? She smiled and replied, I am. Naruto noticed a falsehood in the smile and the tone of her voice, but said nothing. He also wasn't sure what she was lying about, but was sure it wasn't good. He also didn't want to show his hand, so wanted to let this play out. Since the king seemed to have it in for him for some reason. The king then asked, are there any others that will join master? What is your name, hero? Naruto turned and smiled like a fox. He then bowed and replied sarcastically, "Ah yes, you skipped me yesterday, didn't you? How rude of me not to interrupt you and introduce myself. I am Naruto Uzumaki, Genin Shinobi age 15. The king blushed at the jab and coughed. He then continued, "Yes, Master Uzumaki. Since no others will join your party, we will have to compensate you in other ways. You will have to recruit for your party for yourself. Every month we will supply the heroes the funds that they require, but this month, Master Uzumaki's payment will be higher than the others. Here are your initial war chests. Accept them with our thanks." Naruto got 800 silver coins, and the other heroes got 600 silver. They were ordered to gear up and set forth to level up. As Naruto left the castle with the girl, Motoyasu said, "Take good care of her, Naruto. You hear me?" Itsuki then said, "We can't help you directly, but at least I can wish you best of luck with your recruiting." Ren then said, "Until next time. So long." Naruto smiled and replied, "Good luck." Mine then said, "I beg your pardon, Shield Hiro-sama. Let me introduce myself. My name is Mine Sophia. It's an honor to fight with you." Naruto replied, "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, it's nice to meet you, Dadabeo." As he scratched the back of his head. Mine held her hand forward and he took it. She then said happily, "My pleasure." Naruto noticed the mirth but the lack of truth to the statement but hid his reaction with a smile. He thought, she is pretty, but why is she lying to me and what is it all about? He then said, "Guess we should be going and get some equipment." She then said, "To start I'll show you around the village." The tour was on the amazing side since it was bigger than Konoha and it had all the different types of people and animals, like the riding dragons and philolials. He also noticed the use of magic in the vendors on occasion. He did look around and saw signs and noticed that he couldn't read the language. Mine then asked, "Where do you think we should visit next?" Naruto replied, "A place that sells weapons and armor." Mine became excited and exclaimed, "That makes sense. With all that silver I bet that you could buy some great stuff. I'll take you to a shop I trust. They should have everything you should need." Naruto saw no deceit in her this time, so he trusted her. "Might as well." He smiled and replied, "Great, lead on." She then exclaimed, "Follow me." And then began to run off. Naruto smiled and looked at her figure as it headed off into the crowd. He then thought, well at least she is a looker. He then followed her down the streets. They entered a shop with swords and armor all along the shop walls. She then said enthusiastically, "This place gets my highest recommendation." Naruto nodded at the weapons and armor as he passed them in the shop. He then said, "They look like very good quality." The man behind the counter, bald and with a beard, said, "Welcome good sir. Not your first time in a weapons shop is it? At least you've picked the best one." Naruto shook his head and replied, "No. I've been in weapons shops before, but your weapons are a little different than I'm used to." The man put his elbow on the counter and asked, "How so?" Naruto then took a deep breath and pulled out a shuriken and kunai. He then put them back in his pouch. He then explained, "Being the shield hero I can't use them for combat, but I can use them as utilities. Thus, I can show them to you, but not use them. If I were to pick up one of your swords and attempt to use it, it would jump out of my hands and cause a problem. My weapon is the shield. Not a great weapon, but that is what I'm stuck with. Also, she brought me here." The man looked surprised. He then said, "Really? So, you're the dud. And she looks familiar." Mine replied, "I've been in here before and your shop is renowned." Naruto chuckled darkly and replied, "Dud huh? Well guess I'll have to work on that. So, what type of shields and armor do you have? By the way, I'm Naruto Uzumaki." The man smiled and said, "Naruto, huh? If you become a regular I won't give a care what you wield. Alright kid, good to meet you. What is your budget?" Naruto held the shield up the man as he began to look at it with a monocle. He then said, "At a glance it looks like any other small shield. Does it come off?" Naruto shook his head but moved it around his body. The man continued, "I can sense a great amount of magic here, but my appraisal magic doesn't tell me much more." He tapped the gem on the shield. He then said, "Thanks for showing me something interesting anyway." Mine replied, "About 250 silver." Naruto came out in some chainmail with a frown. Mine asked, "How much do you want for it?" The man replied, "Heroes discount 150 silver." Mine then asked, "And the buyback price?" The man looked surprised and replied, "What? Well, let's see. If it's still in mostly new condition, I'll offer you 100 silver." Naruto nodded, understanding that some merchants would buy back items from his days as shinobi. He then said, "I'll take it." The man gave the thumbs up sign and replied, "Great, I'll throw in some innerwear to show my thanks." Naruto paid the man and then put the bag of coins in his pack. Mine happily asked, "Where shall we go next Hiro-sama?" "Off to do battle." Naruto nodded and replied, "Might as well level up." They spent the next little bit moving out into the wilds outside of the castle. Mine appeared to hide behind a tree and signaled that she was going to support him from there. Naruto inwardly frowned. He smiled at the girl and looked around. He then noticed several red icons appear over the grass, where he could see movement. He stood there to see what type of damage these opponents could do. Suddenly several orange balloon-like animals with mouths flew out of the grass at him and latched onto his limbs. He raised an eyebrow as he noticed a green glow around himself, but noticed no drop in his hit points or felt any damage. He then grabbed one and pulled it off and squeezed. It popped and he saw that he gained 1 experience point. He growled and then began to creatively break each of these creatures. He smashed one beneath his shield. Another he used the pointed end of his shield. He even used a little of his Kyuubi chakra to elongate his nails and slash several. He did this for several hours. While this went on, he watched Ren easily kill the same monsters with his sword, much to his annoyance. He did notice Mine kill a couple of the monsters, but she didn't accept his party invite. After this time, he gathered up all the remains of the monsters and fed it to the shield. It took the balloon parts and he saw the shield accept the offering by adding more to the base of the shield. Finally, it added the orange small shield to his shield tree. It also gave him a +2 to defense. She then suggested going to the weapons shop to get some equipment for her so that they could get further tomorrow. He heard something in her voice that spoke of deception, but he agreed. He followed her back to the weapons shop. He learned the man's name was Erhard. Erhard asked, "Gear for the lady? You'd be much stronger being decked out with much stronger equipment." She smiled and replied, "Right." Naruto then stood on the opposite side of the desk to Erhard and asked, "Are you much into haggling, or is that going to get me into more trouble than it is worth?" Erhard began to laugh heartily and replied, "Just don't get too full of yourself and we should be fine." Naruto then said, 10% off with a 70% buyback. Erhard looked surprised at the boy and replied, "Not much to haggle then depending on what is bought." Naruto smiled and put his hand out while Erhard took it. Naruto looked soured as Mine approached. Naruto asked, "How much for this?" Erhard sighed and replied, 480 silver with the discounts I can give you." Naruto smiled in thanks and took a breath. He then pulled the bag of silver out of his pack and paid Erhard. His frog wallet fell on the counter and some of the coins came out. Naruto picked up his wallet and gathered up his old money. He quickly put it back in his pack. He then counted out the coins for Erhard. He then said to Mine, "This will put a crimp in the budget. I hope you don't mind camping in the wilderness." Mine gasped and replied, "Tonight, Hiro-sama." Naruto shook his head and replied, "No, not tonight, but even if the balloon fragments fetch a copper per fragment, it will take a while to make up the money we are investing in you. I hope you can make it worth our while." Mine's smile faltered for a second, but she thought she wasn't caught and replied, "I'm sure we can make it up soon, Hiro-sama. The stronger I am the more loot we can collect from monsters." "Right." She then walked up to him and pushed her breasts into his arm. Naruto acted like this was flustering him. It was, but not in the way that Mine suspected. It caused him to be angry that she was trying to sucker him with sex appeal and he wasn't having it. He began to babble, but inside he was getting angry. "I have already bought your stuff," Naruto explained. He turned to Erhard and asked, "Where do I sell the fragments from monsters?" Erhard replied, "There are shops that specialize in monster goods. They'll buy most of those things off of you." Naruto smiled and replied, "Thanks." Naruto and Mine left the shop and headed to an inn. Naruto looked at the food and then at the utensils. He then asked, "How the heck am I supposed to eat with these? I'm used to using chopsticks." Mine giggled and demonstrated each of the utensils, and Naruto quickly got the gist of how to use them. Just before he took a bite he said, "Thank you for this food," and clapped his hands together. He then took a bite and said, "This is rather good." Mine replied, "I'm so glad you're enjoying your meal." Naruto pulled out a map and pointed to a point on the map. He then said, "The meadow we fought in was over here, right?" Mine replied, "Yep. Tomorrow, we'll be headed to Leifin village. Which lies beyond this map and past Leifin village, we'll find a dungeon that's fit for rookie adventurers." Naruto raised an eyebrow and asked, "A dungeon?" Mine replied, "We won't make very much money either, but it's an excellent spot to work on leveling up." Naruto nodded and replied, "I see where you're going with this idea." Mine then said, "Now that I have new equipment and that I have you defending me, it should be a walk in the park." She then lifted her glass and asked, "We have all this wine, Hiro-sama. It would be a shame to let it go to waste." Naruto shook his head and replied, "I don't drink, sorry, and I advise you don't drink too much. It will cause problems tomorrow. Either with a hangover or with dulled reactions." Mine looked surprised and said, "After the long day we've had and the great vintage of this wine, I would love to share it with you." Naruto was already up and walking away. He waved his hand and said, "Just take it easy on the wine." She then said, "You shouldn't turn me down." Naruto turned and looked at her like she was insane. He then asked, "Why is that?" Mine replied, "Mulmormark is a matriarchy. No man from here would ever turn down a drink offered by a woman." Naruto then replied loud enough for the other patrons to hear, "Well, I'm not from here and I don't want to dull my senses. I'm sorry if I offended you, but I don't want to indulge in alcohol." It is one of the 3 sins of the shinobi and they can cause our downfall. Maybe I'll tell you about the others. Mine sighed and replied, I look forward to it and I'll see you tomorrow. Naruto entered his room and then opened his window. He heard Motoyasu and Itsuki arguing while Jiraiya entered in through the window. Naruto began to take off his armor. He folded in on the table. He then pulled out 100 silver coins and his spare outfit from his backpack. He handed the coins to Jiraiya and said, I just don't trust that woman. There is something off with her. She just ignored my party invite and I just know she is up to something. Jiraiya nodded and put Naruto's pack into his pack and left the coin bag with the remaining silver coins on the table. He then said, you expect her to double-cross you? Naruto nodded and replied, I just get that feeling. She outright lied to me on several occasions. Take the orange fragments to a vendor in the market and you should get about a copper for each fragment. I gave you 100 silvers and I'll keep 25 for myself that I'll put it inside my shield. He began to put the coins under the shield over his arm. Jiraiya chuckled and said, I noticed getting experience points while you were out. I also found a way to get more people in your party. Especially if she betrays you. It might not be moral, but there is a slave trading merchant in town and he has quite a few slaves. I talked with him today. It appears that this kingdom is both a matriarchy and a human dominance kingdom, meaning that we can get some slaves to fill out your party. I don't think the other heroes will like it, but we can mitigate that later since it is legal here. We can offer freedom to the slaves after the waves are complete. I can train you and them while we are outside of the castle. I have my eye on a few. There is one that you will have to make the final decision on. Naruto smiled and asked, not giving me a clue on who it is. Jiraiya chuckled and replied, nope. I just hope that shield can get us both back to Konoha eventually. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night and good choice of not drinking. Naruto chuckled and replied, I've seen you get drunk enough on our trip to know better. Especially with how she was acting. I figure she is going to pull something tonight. I more than likely am going to be robbed and blamed for something. Jiraiya frowned and said, still having problems with how you were treated. I know trust is hard and how Sakura played you wasn't exactly right, but you need to give a girl a chance at some point. I do agree that this isn't the girl that you should. Naruto laid down in the bed and said, good night Arasanen. Jiraiya smiled and replied, good night Godson. He then jumped out the window. Chapter 2 Not so good morning. Several hours later Naruto was woken by someone entering the room. He noticed that he felt groggier than he should have. More than likely under some sort of genjutsu or spell. He smelled mind scent and heard his stuff being rummaged through. It sounded like she had grabbed his old clothes, the new armor, and the bag of money. After looking for more, but finding nothing, she left without disturbing Naruto anymore. Naruto went back to sleep since he knew what had happened. He got up in the morning and pulled his original jumpsuit he had hidden under his pillow and put it on. He then put on his headband. He then decided to take off his jumpsuit and put it, headband, and kunai pouch and a seal on his leg and put on his undergarments that he got from Earhart. He looked around the room and found it empty of any of his belongings or much of anything that wasn't from the inn. He looked out the window and saw soldiers from the castle moving into the inn with spears. He sighed and walked out of his room. He walked up to one of the soldiers and said, I've been robbed. The soldier exclaimed, shut up. You're under arrest. They then attempted to get his hands and take him into custody. Naruto angrily replied, I will come, but if you attack me, I will take all of you down. Do not touch me. He then released a major amount of killing intent. Most of the soldiers fell to their knees. He then said to the man in front of him, I've been robbed. You say I'm under arrest. I will come with you, but as the shield hero I will not be dragged through the town like a common criminal. I only have the cloths on myself and my room is empty. If you find anything in there later, I will know it is a plant and I will come after you. If you want to try and take me, I can just make you and your team go away or I can just come with you, your choice. The soldier grunted a response, we accept your terms. Suddenly the pressure on the soldiers released and they rose. Some moved forward, but the man in front of Naruto shook his head and guided Naruto down to the wagon. Naruto was walked into the main chamber while the guards kept their spears on him, but they kept their distance. Naruto looked around and asked, so I'm brought before the king in my underwear for a crime that I've not even been told about and to top it off, I've been robbed. He then looked over at Mine who appeared to be shaken and was hiding behind Motoyasu. He also noticed his chainmail armor on Motoyasu. He added it up and then said, so how does my armor feel Motoyasu? I sweated in it all day yesterday. Motoyasu looked confused and replied, what do you mean you cad? This was a gift from Mine. Naruto scowled and Mine whimpered. She then cowered even farther behind Motoyasu. He then read the room and saw the same look from all those years ago. The king finally exclaimed, silence, you filth. Most the room flinched, but Naruto looked defiantly at the king. Naruto growled and thought, so this is their game. She is blaming me for something. More than likely rape or at least assault. Great. This isn't going to go well. The king then cradled his head and said, Mine, I'm sorry to ask you this my dear, but would you mind repeating your testimony for us again? Mine appeared to hyperventilate and began to explain, it happened last night. The shield hero forced his way into my room. He was stinking drunk. He grabbed me and pinned me down. He said something like the night is still young. And the next thing I knew, he was tearing all my clothes off. Somehow, I managed to get away and ran down the hall. I found Motoyasu-sama happened to be staying at the same inn. I explained it to him. Motoyasu then explained, if she hadn't had me wait until dawn to call the knights, I would have gladly cut you down myself. Naruto growled and replied, that never happened, and even with your toothpick you wouldn't be able to beat me. I went to bed and then to sleep. I was robbed. I also don't drink. It is against shinobi rules. I would say that you're a fool, but you're a worse fool than I've ever been. My room was stripped of everything that wasn't the inn's. The king then stood and exclaimed, to think that the Cardinal Shield hero would commit the greatest sin in this country. Naruto raised an eyebrow and asked, you aren't even listening, Sin. The aide replied, in Mulmormark, even attempted sexual assault is punishable by death. The king exclaimed angrily, if you weren't a hero, you would be executed at once. Naruto's whisker marks became darker and his eyes became slits. He then exclaimed darkly, you would execute someone on charges only. Sounds to me like there is a tribunal of fools. I need to have a liar tell the truth. Mine stuck out her tongue and pulled down her lower right eyelid. I've been wronged and hope you figure out what is going on before you make a big mistake. Two spears cross in front of Naruto. He grabs one of the spears and beaks the pole with little effort. I also bet you have manufactured proof, since my room was barren and without anything when I left. I'll bet your guards found something of hers. I'll bet you 20 silver. Any takers? The guard walked in front of Naruto and bent down. He then explained, while conducting a search of the shield hero's room, we found this strewn across his bed. He lifts a torn negligee. Naruto looked at the guard who was sweating as if it was summer in a desert. There were gasps from around the room. Mine blushes and then screams in faux shame. Motoyasu puts his arms out to defend Mine and then exclaims, you animal. The king then explains, the proof seems rather undeniable. Naruto curled his fist and blood began to leak out of it. He then said, like I said, manufactured. Strewn. How can I sleep? Also, you and your men are such hypocrites. As I said, my room was empty of everything except for what the inn provided. I only had these undergarments. Your guards manufactured this evidence and understand what was said. And I told you what was going to happen and even placed a bet on it. I knew that you would frame me. He then pulled out the 20 silver and threw it on the ground in front of Motoyasu, except for one. Holding a single coin and then saying, lucky for you I can't use this as a weapon, I would use it to bang some sense into you. He then flicked it at the spear hero. It hit the man right in the center of the forehead. The spear hero stumbled back. You stole my stuff. Even lost a bet against me. So, I'm going to train without you, and I know. You're going to make me a pariah. Go ahead. I've been there, done that before. Blamed for something I didn't do. You guys don't know me and assume the worst, I bet. Well, too bad, I don't have anything left to bet with since they have it. You want to know what? You have no idea what you're up against. I'm sure that you've done something that you shouldn't have and there will be political repercussions. He pointed at the spear hero, who was nursing a lump on his forehead. Naruto continued, I don't drink. You stole my stuff or were tricked into receiving it. Check my room for the clothes I came here in and my tools. I bet you don't find them. Because I don't have them here on me. Better yet. I'm out of here. Blame me for what was it? Attempted rape. Good luck with that. I've never touched a naked woman in my life. I'm still a virgin. I'm 15. I bet she is older than me and was trying to get me to drink last night and I turned her down. I bet it is against the law in your worlds for a woman of her age to have sex with someone of my age. Isn't it? This is what I get for spurning her, well so be it. I'm out of here. Ren then exclaimed, I guess he thinks a hero can do whatever the hell he wants to and get away with it. The point Naruto made seemed to be lost on the heroes. The point that most countries in their modern worlds had rape laws dealing with underage consent. Motoyasu then exclaimed, this world is not some consequence-free playground for you. Know your place, scoundrel. Naruto then said slowly, playground, your world was all peace and love. Mine was death and war. Don't talk to me about consequences. The aide then said, I knew it. It was a mistake to summon all four at once. The noble exclaimed, exactly, we shouldn't have summoned the shield hero at all. Another noble replied, who could have known that he would have been such scum. Naruto growled and thought, this is about the shield. They appear to hate the shield. Why should I help this country? The nobility all seem to be against me. He then said, fine, send me back to my world. Summon another shield hero or whatever. I'm not running, but why would I want to help those that seem to want to not stop the waves of catastrophe? Or is it just you want to stop the shield hero? Itsuki asked, how can you think of abandoning your job? Motoyasu then said, I say, let the coward run on home. Who wants to fight alongside a rapist? Good riddance. Naruto shook his head and exclaimed, you really don't get it, do you? You've been taken from your homes and forced to fight in a war that you're not ready to fight. This little girl is playing games and sewing decent. You don't know about life and death struggles at all. I do. I've had to kill. Have you? The king exclaimed, enough. We can't send you back. We can only summon a new hero once all 4 heroes meet their end. You can go home if you fight off all the incoming waves. Then you might be able to go home. Motoyasu asked, but sir, does that mean we'll have to fight alongside a criminal like him? Naruto exclaimed, screw you. Toothpick boy. Naruto chuckled darkly and then exclaimed, I'll figure out how to handle the waves my way. Also, there is no way you can imprison me. I can get out of any prison you make, so I'm leaving. The king sighed and replied, that is fine, but news of your crime has already spread amongst the people. That is your punishment. You should never expect to lead a decent life in this country. Naruto then turned and began to walk out. He then felt his right arm being pulled back. He turned to see an angry Motoyasu. Motoyasu said, hey. Wait a minute. Naruto growled and replied, a minute. I have little offense and you want me to waste my time with your pleas to listen to your ideas of what you think I've done. I've done nothing wrong, well he pointed at mine, who cowered from the angry glare. He continued, stole from me and framed me for rape or attempted rape. My adopted mother would squash me for even thinking of doing that, let alone the girls I know. I'm terrible with girls. I was an outcast for my whole life and you? He looked at the king and continued, I will help you with the waves, but you interfere with my training, I will squash your men and possibly your kingdom. Now let go before you lose your arm. He looked down at the arm and the air became oppressive. Motoyasu shakingly let go. Naruto walked off and Motoyasu shakily exclaimed, yeah, walk away you criminal. Naruto made it as far as the market only to be intercepted by Earhart. Naruto raised an eyebrow, but still scowled at the man. Earhart exclaimed, I heard what you did to that girl in your party. Naruto continued to stare the man down and then said, she never accepted my party invite. We need to talk elsewhere. Earhart let him down and saw from his demeanor that the boy was innocent. He waved him to follow. Soon after they entered Earhart's shop. He then said, talk. Naruto then said, you can come out sensei. Jiraiya appeared leaning against one of the posts. He then said, the boy's still a virgin and wouldn't harm a girl unless they were an enemy. I watched her break into his room and steal his stuff. His clothes from our world, the suit of armor you sold to him and the bag of silver. Earhart looked at the man in surprise and asked, who are you? Naruto growled and said, no Theatrix. We are limited for time. I need to get out to the meadows and train, I'm still level 2, but just barely. Jiraiya nodded and replied, I am Jiraiya, one of the Sannin, the sage of toads, the teacher of the 4th Hokage in this brat. Shinobi of Konoha. At your service. He turned to Naruto and said, I got about 1 silver for the remains of the balloons you left me. Earhart rubbed his bald head and said, I don't know what to say. What can I help you get? Naruto then replied, I need 2 capes with hoods and some boots for each of us. Some clothes for me. That should do it. We will figure the rest out later. Earhart nodded and returned with a couple pairs of boots and 2 folded bundles. He then said, I can give this to you as a loan. Since she stole from you. Naruto shook his head and replied, how much? Earhart seemed struck aback and replied, 12 bronze pieces for the lot. Naruto nodded and Jiraiya laid the coins on the counter. Naruto then said, I want our relationship to be fair and true. Earhart laughed and replied, works for me. Anytime you need something come here and I'll do what I can. Jiraiya put the boots in his pack and put the brown cloak on. He covered his head and said, I'll meet you outside the castle in the woods. He handed Naruto his pack and then vanished out the door. Naruto put on the outfit, green cloak and then put on the boots. He watched Earhart put some items into his pack while he got dressed. He smiled widely and then said, Earhart, I'll be back. He then left the building. He walked down the street ignoring all the glares and then left the castle. He finally met up with his sensei after entering the woods. The pair began to slaughter balloons and Naruto watched his experience points climb quickly. The pair spent the night out in the woods. The pair entered the curtain walls separately. Naruto watched a man get some money for balloon pieces. He then came up to the vendor and Naruto asked, how much for this? He put a wad down. The man looked down greedily and replied, a bronze piece for the whole lot. Naruto frowned and replied, you gave that man 2 bronze per piece and there are at least 200 pieces here. You wouldn't be trying to steal from me? Or would live ones get me a better price? He pulled the cape away to reveal several balloons comped onto Naruto's side. He then pulled the vendor under his cloak and the vendor quickly replied, you win. Naruto let the man go and then said, I only want to be treated fairly and not be cheated. Now spread the word around that I want to be treated fair or the other merchants will get bite marks too. The man paid Naruto his 2 silver and then replied, of course I will spread the word around. I wouldn't want any alleged crimes to come in between business. Naruto nodded and walked off. Naruto left the merchant and then noticed an apothecary store and some of the plants growing from in a planter inside. He continued out to Earhart's and entered. He then looked at an old wooden shield. He waited but then left the store after writing a note. He left and went out of the curtain walls. Earhart found the note on the counter and read it. He sighed and shook his head. Naruto met Jiraiya at the camp inside the forest and the pair prepared a meal. Naruto fed his shield the bones of the fish after they ate their meal. He received the fish shield. In the morning he found the same plant that he saw in the window of the apothecary. He plucked one and dropped it into his shield. He had already opened orange shield, now the yellow and leaf shield appeared on his upgrade tree. He had already mastered the small shield. He then said, leaf shield. The shield then changed into a leaf. He then picked some of the plant that he was looking at and suddenly the shield glowed and a display appeared saying, gathering skill +1. He noted that the plant quality was improved by the shield. He then began to forage for more of these plants while Jiraiya went after more balloons. He gained experience while collecting herbs. He later went back into the town and into the apothecary shop. The apothecary exclaimed, wow, this is really great stuff. Where did you find these? Naruto replied, in the forest right outside of the castle. Didn't you know? The apothecary replied, sure, but I've never seen anything of such high quality. I was certain it wasn't much more than average. He then placed the money on the counter. Naruto had gone to a tavern with Jiraiya, but they sat separately. Jiraiya sat in the corner and Naruto up at the bar. Naruto ate his food, but sighed. He then thought, the food has had no taste since that day I go so angry. Arasanen says it will pass, but I'm not sure. The food just doesn't have any taste. 3 dregs of society walked up to Naruto and one said, oh great shield hero. We'll join your party if you want. The second chimed in, that's right thank your lucky stars. He then put his hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto was fuming inside but said in a monotone, okay, how about we discuss the terms up front. The second responded, sure thing. Naruto then explained, your pay will be performance-based. Catch my drift? The first replied, nope, not a clue. The trio laughed. Naruto explained, it means you will be paid according to the loot we get on our quest and since I'm the leader I get at least 40%. I'll split up the rest amongst you guys at my discretion. If you do nothing, then you can expect to be paid nothing. The first exclaimed, what the hell? That could mean if you get a wild hair up your ass. We could get nothing. Keeping it all for yourself. Naruto replied, I promise to pay you if you do your job. Assuming you can. He got up and walked towards the door. Jiraiya was impressed with how far the boy had come but saw the anger brewing below the surface. He wasn't sure how to fix this. He shadowed the foursome down the street. The second then suggested, how about we go pick up some equipment boss man. Naruto angrily replied, buy your own equipment. I have nothing to gain by doing that for you. He then stopped in front of the trio with his back facing them. The first then said, forget the party crap and just hand over your money. Naruto closed his eyes and reached into his cloak. He then said calmly, now if you only had started off with that. You could have saved us a whole bunch of time. The second laughed and said, yeah, right. Who knew it would be so easy? He reached out his hand and Naruto turned and put a balloon on the hand. While pushing the man back. The first thug drew a knife and swung it at Naruto while the third did similar to the first. Naruto blocked the first and kicked the third in the chest. When the knife of the first impacted on the shield glowed brightly. While the fight was quick for the thugs. Naruto was bored with this fight since they moved so slow compared to him. Naruto growled and watched as the trio retreated as fast as their legs could carry them. Naruto stepped on the returning balloon and then kicked it. Little offense and total defense. I'm in a terrible loop. I need more help. The voice came from behind him, looks like you could use some help. A shady man in a top hat came around a corner with a large smile. He then continued, it's clear you don't have any or at least not much. What luck I have exactly what you need. Naruto scowled off in the distance and replied, if you're offering party members then I don't want any. The man joyfully replied, party members? No, no. What I'm offering you is a service you'll find more convenient. Naruto looked back and asked, and what is that? The man happily asked, interested, are we? Naruto sighed and replied, leave me alone. The man laughed and said, you've got that look in your eyes that I just adore. You're every bit the rumors said you'd be. Naruto was not interested and asked, rumors? So, then you know who I am? The man smiled and replied, of course I do. Brave shield hero sir. If my offer interests you, then follow me. And we can discuss it further. He then led Naruto to a large tent further across town. Jiraiya followed at a distance with a smile. They entered the tent and the man said, right this way. They were cages galore filled with monsters and creatures that look like monsters. Naruto asked, so what are you offering? The man laughed and replied, can't you tell by just looking? They're slaves, my boy. Naruto shook his head and said, no way. The man turned and spread his arms as if to show the entire area. He exclaimed, yes way. I run a slave trading business. Naruto asked, what would make you think I would want to own slaves? The man replied, oh, I don't know. The fact that they could neither lie nor betray their master. We keep all of our slaves in line by putting them under the effects of a curse. A strong seal-based curse. Things that can take their very lives. What do you say? Naruto growled and then sighed. After a minute he then replied, alright, show me what you got. The man then said, I knew you had what it takes to be a most wonderful patron. Naruto looked around and noted, some of them don't look human. The man replied, I can assure you they still are technically. Naruto looked at the man with a raised eyebrow and asked, what do you mean? He replied, well they have monstrous appearance, they are still human. He began to explain the difference between beast men and demi-humans. Naruto noticed a cough and saw a girl with dull eyes in the cage as he passed. The man continued, here let me show you my best. Chapter 3 Enter Raphtalia and Naruto followed the man to a cage and saw a wolf man. He then explained, it's at level 75. Naruto looked at the wolf man and saw his own level, which was 5, as was Jiraiya. He then thought, that around 15 times higher than my level. He then asked, how much do you want for it? The man then replied, it is highly capable in battle and fairly rare. How does 15 gold pieces sound? Naruto looked at the wolf man again and then replied, he has an injured leg and he is your most expensive. You know full well that I can't afford it. The man happily replied, you've got a good eye and you're going to be one of my best customers. I got a nose for these things. So, I have to make sure you have a keen eye if you catch my drift. Good sir. Now that you've seen my best. What type of slave are you in the market for? Naruto sighed and replied, cheap and one that I can train. In other words, a demi-human. If I understand right. They aren't much suited for combat or manual labor, he replied. It doesn't matter. I can train them to be what I need, Naruto replied. Are you sure? The man asked. Yeah, I have a knack for training and will figure it out, Naruto replied. If you say so, the man replied happily. He then moved to a different area. Naruto recognized the area as the area with the girl with the dull eyes. The man then explained, these are the cheapest slaves I can offer you other than the dead ones of course. Naruto looked at the girl and said authoritatively, raise your head. The girl coughed and looked at him with half-dead eyes. The man explained, that mangy half-raccoon is sick as a dog and a couple spokes short of a cartwheel. I'm having a hell of a time with her myself. He laughed. The girl cringed and the man continued, you see her previous owner loved his torture. He chuckled but continued, but she's not long for this world. I suggest something else. Naruto looked at the girl and said, I've decided. She'll do. I'll take her. She became fearful and her eyes became wide. He looked at the next cage and saw a rabbit with a deformed hand. What about this one? The trader replied, that one has a birth defect and isn't worth much, but might work for helping you. She only has one good hand though. Naruto looked at the girl. She had pink hair and ears. She appeared to be only a little older than the raccoon girl. He smiled and said, I'll take her too. The girl looked a little terrified. The group had made it to the man's office. Naruto cut his thumb on his tooth and let it drip into the ink bowl. The man then said, let's begin. He walked up to the girls along with Naruto. Both bent down to raccoon girl's eye level. The man pushed down her hands to reveal a seal on her chest. Naruto looked at the seal with fascination. The man dipped a paintbrush into the ink and then wiped it inside the seal. The seal became active and a purple flame came out of the seal. The girl began to grunt in agony. Naruto looked at the man and he replied to the unasked question, nothing to worry about, the pain will dissipate soon. That slave crest on her chest makes it impossible to defy you. There you go, she's all yours. He then noticed a no-name demi-human come up on his HUD. They repeated the process for the rabbit girl. He then stood up and put a bag on the table and said, 30 silvers each, right? He poured some of the ink into his shield and noticed slave trader shield come up in his vision. The man then said, there is 2 extra in here. Naruto replied, that is your commission. You were going to squeeze it out of me anyways, weren't you? The man clasped his hands together and said happily, well, you certainly know your stuff. He then got down to the girl's level and asked, what are your names? The raccoon girl coughed and waited a couple seconds before responding, I'm called Raphtalia. The rabbit girl replied, my name is Sylvie. Master, she seemed annoyed. Naruto then said, we need to go, Raphtalia and Sylvie. He put his hands out to them. They tentatively took them. Naruto led them out of the tent. The trader smiled and said, I look forward to your next visit. And then thought, so he really did choose her. And the rabbit girl too. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. Naruto walked along with Raphtalia and Sylvie. He felt Raphtalia's hand shaking in his. He entered Earhart's shop and Earhart said, "Welcome." "Oh, it's you, what's with the girls?" Naruto replied, "Needed another party member, so I bought a couple slaves I need to equip them. We need weapons and clothes. Under 12 silver if you can." Naruto was looking at his help screen and waiting for the girls to get out of the changing rooms. The drape opened and he said, "At last." "Worse than Ino." Raftalia looked down and said, "I'm sorry sir." Sylvia asked, "Who is Ino?" Naruto sighed and then said, "Doesn't matter. Draw your knife." Both girls looked surprised and exclaimed, "Huh?" He pulled his cape away and revealed several orange balloons. The girls cringed and he pulled a balloon away from his side. He looked at Raftalia and then said, "I want you to kill it." Raftalia was shaken and replied in a scared tone, "No." Naruto sighed and then thought, "I'm sorry, but it needs to be done." He then said, "Raftalia, that's an order." The seal on her chest began to spark and she grunted in pain. She then fell to her knees. He then continued, "You are hurting yourself by not doing this. You need to go through with this." Her resolve came to her and the seal stopped sparking as she rose to her feet. She drew her dagger and pointed at the balloon held by Naruto. She screamed and charged the balloon. It caught the dagger in its jaws and spit it out, thus landing her on her butt. Naruto exclaimed, "Not good enough. Go again." She charged again and popped the balloon. Naruto moved forward and she cringed. He patted her on the head and then said, "Good job. Now we are going to be working together. You are going to be fighting for me while I protect you. Do you understand?" She nodded and replied, "Yes sir." He pulled another balloon out and Sylvie immediately stabbed it twice in succession, popping it quickly. He nodded at this happily. Earhart then said, "She isn't much. Are you sure she will be able to help you out?" Naruto replied, "Yes. Sensei will not be able to be around all the time and I will train them as much as possible. I also think we can fix Sylvie's arm. The slave merchant said it was a birth defect, but I think it was broken and healed wrong. We'll be back when we can to get equipment when needed." Earhart nodded and said, "I look forward to it, kid." Naruto turned and began to walk out. He then said, "Let's go girls." Raftalia got up and sheathed her dagger. She quickly followed him out the door while saying, "Yes sir." Sylvia nodded and followed Naruto. Naruto was walking down the main thoroughfare and saw a man mistreating a couple of demi-human slaves. He then heard Raftalia's stomach growl. He asked, "Are you hungry?" She shook her head and replied, "No sir." Naruto sighed and said, "You can't fight on an empty stomach. Let's get some lunch." She was confused at hearing this and repeated him, "Lunch." She then followed him to a tavern but saw a sign that said, "We don't serve our demi-humans." She then said, "Sir." Naruto sighed and asked, "Now what?" She tried to explain, "This place." Naruto being hungry just wanted to eat said, "Hurry up." Both girls quickly followed him into the tavern. The Naruto noticed the patrons get angry. He smiled inside at this but showed nothing outside. He heard one say, "The shield hero. What is he doing here?" Naruto sat down and had the girls sit on the opposite side of him at the table. He looked at the girls and they seemed to be eyeing a plate that a boy was eating. The waiter grumbled but came over and asked, "Can I help you?" Naruto replied, "I'll have the cheapest plate you have for me and 2 of what that kid is having for the girls." The waiter replied, "That will be 13 copper coins." Naruto put the coins on the table. Raftalia asked, "Why sir?" Naruto looked at her and asked, "Why what? Aren't you hungry?" She shook her head and asked, "Why are you getting it for us?" Sylvie also nodded her head. Naruto replied, "I need you both to be fed and healthy to help me. I also am going to train you both along with my sensei." The waiter returned with the food and placed it in front of the girls who had stars in their eyes and were staring at their plates. The waiter said, "Alright, here's your food." Naruto chuckled and said, "Are you just going to stare at it or are you going to eat it?" Both girls asked in unison, "Are you sure this is for me?" Naruto replied, "I bought it for you. Didn't I? So, dig in. We have training to do." Raftalia began to eat with gusto, while Sylvie ate at a modest pace but kept an eye on Naruto. Naruto noticed this but said nothing. Raftalia had begun to choke on the food and Naruto said, "Drink this." While he pushed a glass of water forward. Raftalia drank the water and cleared the blockage. Naruto asked, "How's the food?" Raftalia smiled and nodded. Sylvie nodded and cracked a smile. Naruto took a bite of his food and grimaced. He thought, taste still eludes me. Not sure why, but haven't been able to taste food for years now. The trio left the tavern and headed to the woods. Naruto then said, "We will meet the other person in our party in a minute, but there are a few things that I have to say first. I also have a few things that I have to ask also. My sensei is a major pervert. I'm warning you now, but you're young, so you should evade his eyes for now. Unless there is something that I should know about demi-humans." Sylvie spoke first, "Master, you look like my last master. Thus, the reason I don't like you much. Also, as we level, we demi-humans will age quickly to maturity." Naruto raised an eyebrow, but nodded. He then said, "I figured that your last master broke your arm and let it heal wrong on purpose. He then sold you and called it a birth defect. Sylvie nodded and replied, so, why did you buy a useless slave like me? A deep voice from behind a tree replied, because your hair reminded him of the girl who he loved and broke his heart. She also betrayed him. The other one reminds him of the one he knew was going to betray him. I will let him explain. Oh, by the way. I am your other teammate, Jiraiya, and his teacher. Now first we will fix that arm of yours. It will hurt, but with the abilities of the shield and his medicines, he seems to be able to whip up. You will be healed in no time. Also, both of us will be teaching you in the art of the shinobi to broaden your abilities. Now with you both being mistreated slaves, you can rest assured that he will not mistreat you, but he will be firm on using those seals to make sure that you learn to overcome your fears and help save this world. Sylvie looked questioningly at Naruto and asked, who is this woman who betrayed you? Naruto motioned for them to sit by the fire, and he sighed heavily. He then began, the first is Sakura Haruno, my first love and one of my teammates from my world. Looking back to her I was only an annoyance or a means to an end. She wanted to get closer to Sasuke Uchiha, our other teammate. Sure, the guy had a lot going for him. He was from a prestigious clan and was better than I was, but he didn't give the girls who followed him the time of day, and I mean almost all the girls in our class were in love with him. He air quoted in love and continued, eventually the team became stronger, but she was getting left behind in ability. I was beginning to match his abilities or even surpass them, in some areas at least. The girls always found him cool, and him having his clan slaughtered made him distant but also hard to approach. This caused the girls to want to be around him even more. He sighed again and looked at Sylvie, I'm not using you to replace Sakura. Almost like I want to keep myself from repeating the same mistake again. Jiraiya coughed and said, I would tell them now. Let them judge you for you and let your actions speak for themselves. Naruto whined, do I have to? They're how old? Raphtalia replied, 10. Sylvie replied, 11. Jiraiya said, only a little younger than you when you became a genin. Given what Sylvie said they will be growing quickly to help you with these waves. Raphtalia looked expectantly at Naruto and asked, you're a hero? Naruto nodded and replied, yeah. Believe it or not. I'm the shield hero. Sylvie began to cry and exclaimed, I'm sorry. If you're the shield hero then you're going to help the demi-humans. Please forgive me. Naruto reached over and Sylvie flinched. Naruto rubbed her head between her ears. He then said, it's alright. I guess there is history. Tonight, we are going to talk and go over training. So, to continue. Sasuke had a brother. The one who slaughtered their clan. I got to meet him and well here is where we get into the complications. Back when on the day I was born a demon made of pure chakra, you guys would say energy for easy reference. It attacked my village. The fourth Hokage, the leader of the village, fought the beast and sealed it into an infant. That infant was me. Now back to the original story. Sasuke's brother Itachi wanted to capture me for this beast, the Kyuubi, or the nine-tailed fox. Sasuke left the village to chase his brother. Being the arrogant prick, he thought he could beat a man who had years more experience than himself. Well, Sasuke only had at most a year of practical experience and got his ass handed to him. He got his arm broken and put under a jinjutsu, or as you would call it, a strong illusion. He was taken back to the village while Sensei and I went to find the fifth Hokage, the woman I think of as my adoptive mother or grandmother. You see, my parents died on the night the Kyuubi was sealed in me. When we finally persuaded her to come back to the village. Jiraiya began to laugh and said, now that is a story unto itself. You were an arrogant punk yourself, but with how you were treated I understand how you got that way. Naruto scowled and replied, little thanks to you godfather. Now after we brought Tsunade back. She healed Sasuke and Kakashi, my genin team captain. Not much of a teacher but on with the story. Sasuke had a seal on him and was offered an opportunity to get some training from a trader. He took it and abandoned the village. Sakura had attempted to stop him, but he knocked her out easily and he left the village with some enemy shinobi. We learned about his leaving and formed a party to chase after him. It consisted of our friends who were the most competent but at the lower levels of skills. Sylvie asked, why not send more skilled people after him? Naruto shrugged and Jiraiya replied, at the time only a large team of genin headed by a newly minted Chunin were all that were available. The elders apparently had tied up most of our special forces, but Sasuke's group did run into a Jounin squad and the group with Sasuke were slowed and possibly weakened. Naruto guffawed at that and exclaimed, we had to leave each member with a single member of the enemy squad. Heck, Rock Lee came and helped me with that bone guy. Raphtalia asked in a worried tone, bone guy. Naruto waved it off and replied, I'll explain later. Now back to the story. I finally caught up with Sasuke. He had changed and was able to use his curse mark to strengthen himself. He went for the kill while I went for the capture. Jiraiya explained, it is easier to kill an opponent than capture, since you have to make sure that the wounds you inflict don't kill them. Break an arm or leg, instead of just stabbing them in a vital area. Naruto nodded and continued, the fight reformed an entire valley. He shoved an assassination technique into my chest and nearly took out my heart. He did a pile driver move on my head and spine. Burned me with a high-level fire technique. I for my part slammed him into the cliff several times and generally beat the crap out of him. We finally clashed with me using the Kyuubi's chakra and my Rasengan against his second-level curse and Chidori, an assassination technique. I ended up on the ground on my back with him kneeling and looking down on me. I kneed him in the head and knocked him out. I was spent but tied him up and slung him on my back. I headed back to the village and found one of the enemy combatants and made a clone while taking her prisoner. Sylvie asked, "A clone?" Naruto nodded and replied, "You must keep this secret from others, since it's an ability that I hope to teach you later." Shadow Clone Jutsu. Naruto had crossed his hands with his index and middle fingers extended. In a poof of smoke, a second Naruto appeared. Naruto looked confused and said, "Weird, it looks like that took more chakra than I thought it should." Jiraiya thought and said, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." He mimicked Naruto's hands, and in a poof of smoke a second Jiraiya appeared. He then rubbed his chin and looked at the two Narutos. He then said, "Looks like the clone doesn't have the shield. So, it may not have the weapon restriction." He pulled out a kunai and threw it to the clone. The clone replied, "I see no warnings for using it. I have intent to use it on any enemy that shows up." Jiraiya nodded and said, "We can use this to our advantage." Look, the clone appears as a party member. "Let's hope you don't create 1,000 like I heard you did against Mizuki." Naruto chuckled and said, looking at the loss of chakra and mana. "I can't make more than 20 before I'm out of both." Jiraiya grinned and said, "Looks like more chakra control exercises." Naruto grabbed his head and exclaimed, "No." He then got control of himself. He took a deep breath and said, to continue the story. "I finally met up with Kakashi. Who took Sasuke and sped off. I met up with a medical team that ignored him and they helped me take the girl named Taiya back to the village. I also fell to exhaustion at this point. I found out after waking in the hospital that Kakashi had said that I had injured Sasuke and was beating him after he was unconscious until he arrived to save him and return him to the village. Sakura, being who she was, believed him and came into my room and began to beat me. When the nurse came in, Sakura said that I had gotten up and attacked her. The funny part was I was still in the bed, bandaged up, bleeding from new wounds, and still hooked up to the monitoring equipment. She said under her breath, "You tell them and I'll kill you." My crush for her died at that moment. Sylvie began to cry and said, "I'm sorry." Naruto shook his head and said, "It wasn't you. Your hair just reminded me of her." He then pointed to Raphtalia, who slinked back in fear. He chuckled and explained, "Your hair reminds me of the girl, I mean woman, who said that she was going to join my party but lied, stole, and accused me of a grievous crime." Raphtalia shakingly asked, "If I may ask, what crime?" Naruto sighed and looked at Jiraiya, who nodded. Naruto replied, "Attempted rape." Both girls gasped. Naruto looked down and clenched his fists and was soon drawing blood. Jiraiya then explained, she had said that she wanted to join Naruto's party, but when they went to gain experience, she didn't join the party. Later she had him buy her an expensive outfit. They then went to dinner and afterwards she asked him to drink. He refused, wisely I might add. Later, after he went to bed, she and another cast a sleep spell on him and ransacked his room for his equipment and money. They even took his clothes from our world. Still haven't gotten a line on those yet. I might also have a line of learning the alphabet of this world and possibly the magic one too. Seems like the crone at the magic shop is taking a fancy to me, but back to the story. The girl gave Naruto's armor to the spear hero and then a little later staged a fake scene about her being attacked by Naruto, who was asleep. The boy had at least the good graces to not try and go after Naruto at that time. Naruto groggy and me helping him would have torn the spear hero to pieces. He and Naruto chuckled together. Jiraiya continued, a scene was made by the guards and then at the palace by the king. The other heroes don't believe that Naruto is innocent. The boy hasn't been with a woman yet. Raphtalia asked, "Been with a woman?" Sylvie blushed at the statement. Jiraiya sighed and said, "Guess I have to explain this." He raised his hand to halt Naruto's complaint. He then said, "They must know. They are going to go through puberty and more than likely fairly soon. You are still going through it and we will have to deal with it. Well, their chronological age is 10 and 11. They will age quickly and I'm hoping their minds also age along with their bodies." Jiraiya then went on to give a clinical explanation of sex and how babies were made. He finished with, "Now that you know. I don't want you to engage in this until I say that you're ready. Any of you. Am I understood?" The girls replied, "Yes sir." Naruto scratched the back of his head and then said, "I'm surprised you could do that explanation without going into some weird tangent, but yes, I understand." Jiraiya chuckled and said, "I worry about you, Naruto, and I don't want you to have any kids too soon. Also, Tsunadeheim will kill me if you get too frisky." Naruto began to laugh heartily. Jiraiya blushed and exclaimed, "Laugh it up, but I figure that these girls are going to help heal your heart and you have to be the one to hold them in check." Naruto wiped a tear away and replied, I understand. Yeah, Bachan can be scary. How did summoning go? Jiraiya scowled and replied, I was able to summon Gamakichi and give him a note from Ma, Pa, and Tsunadeheim. It took about 3/4 of my chakra to summon him, so we are limited in that route. We should get some news tomorrow. The clones popped and Jiraiya began to cook food. He then turned and there was a poof of smoke. He bowed and said, Fukasaku-sensei. A toad with wide eyebrows, goatee, and mohawk had appeared. Naruto quickly used his hand to calm the girls. The toad spoke, but the girls couldn't understand. Jiraiya boy and Naruto-chan, I'm glad to see that both of you are in good health if not in your normal attire. Tsunade-chan has a scroll for you and the boy for training. She also has a treatment for the girl that you said he might choose. Ah, I see he did choose her. We also can't reverse summon you. This world for some reason will not allow it, but I can summon myself with the use of sage arts. Jiraiya nodded and replied, I see. Yes, he is somewhat predictable, but he chose another. I think that both will be good for helping him and they look like they might just be able to learn our ways. We might also be able to learn their ways. After we fix the girl's arm, we can start the chakra exercises. We need more advanced training for Naruto though. Naruto translated for the girls. Fukasaku nodded and replied, I agree, he is advancing well. Did you do the element test? Jiraiya shook his head and replied, no, I didn't have the paper to do it. Fukasaku smiled and said, if there is an element that you can't do. She sent basic scrolls on it. She also included some jutsu in each element for training. You can also start sage training if you feel he is ready, but don't let him pull the chakra without me around. Jiraiya nodded and replied, of course. He took the pack from the toad and the toad left in a poof of smoke. He then turned to Naruto and said, the language magic lasts for 3 days and it will be up tonight. So, we need me to start to learn this language soon. Naruto nodded and looked the girls. He turned and quickly caught the scroll tossed to him by Jiraiya. He opened it and exclaimed, you want me to do it? Jiraiya chuckled and replied, yep, you're their master, so have at it. Naruto gave Sylvie a sympathetic look and said, this scroll explains how to fix your arm. I'll explain it to you first and then we can go through it point by point. Sylvie looked afraid and cradled her deformed arm. She asked tentatively, is it going to hurt? Naruto nodded and replied, yes, it will. You may even pass out from the pain. Let's go over the procedure. He looked into her eyes. She finally nodded. He opened the scroll and it also had pictures. He began to explain, alright, I need to re-break the bone and more than likely crush part that is angled. That is the part that will hurt the worst. We need the bone broken in such a way that we can align it for a straight arm. After that I straighten the arm and push in some chakra to the area. Not sure what that will do to you, but it will help with the arm brace that I'm going to put over the area for it to heal. Do you have any questions? Sylvie asked, why do you need to crush the bent area? Naruto looked down at the scroll and then replied, according to Bachan, it is to make sure that those bones don't interfere with the arm healing correctly. It also said I should activate your core chakra. Is that okay with you? She nodded. He then explained, I need you to uncover your stomach and lay down. I will then push some chakra into you. This is supposed to activate your chakra. Sylvie nodded and said, if this will help me then I will do anything. When this is over, I will tell my tale. She pulled her battle dress and underdress over her head and laid down on it. Naruto blushed and turned quickly. Jiraiya slapped his head and said, the girl trusts you. She is not fully naked and is too young to cause you to be interested. Now get to work. Naruto gulped and turned to the girl and looked at her eyes. He saw determination in her eyes. His eyes traveled down her body and just before he said anything Jiraiya said, yes, children look the same until puberty. Now get to it. Naruto looked at the girl and pushed down her underpants to reveal her belly button. He missed a laugh in the back of his mind as he continued. His hand became engulfed in a blue hue, but there were flecks of orange, nearly microscopic. He touched her stomach and pushed his chakra into Sylvie. She gasped and then moaned. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, but nodded to Naruto. He soon felt a light tug on his chakra and halted the chakra. Sylvie was breathing hard and her eyes were heavy-lidded. He asked, did I do it right? Jiraiya nodded and replied, yes, I've heard that it sometimes has a euphoric effect upon activation. It happens on those who are older. You would not want to do it on a woman in her 30s. She would want you for that to happen again and again, if you know what I mean. Naruto looked at Jiraiya and asked, you mean I made her? Jiraiya nodded. Naruto sighed and just shook his head. He put her undershirt back on and put her on a sleeping bag. He turned to Raphtalia and asked, are you ready to have your chakra activated? Raphtalia couldn't decide and asked, are you going to order me? And will he do it? Jiraiya shook his head and replied, I will not activate your chakra. That is his job. Also, you're too young for me. Naruto scowled and replied, I will not order you, but it will help you. He then noticed Sylvie's status updated with a chakra bar that was slowly filling. He then said, it worked for her. Raftalia then asked, can I keep my shirt on? Naruto laughed and replied, yes of course, I only need to touch the area around your belly button. She nodded and lifted her battle dress off with the help of Naruto. She then laid down on a sleeping bag. Naruto moved the undergarments out of the way and then asked, are you ready? She nodded and replied, yes, master. Naruto repeated the process of pushing chakra to his hand and then placing it on the girl's stomach. There were still flecks of orange chakra in his chakra. This time the reaction wasn't so dramatic. She just grunted and then looked expectantly at Naruto when he finished. Sylvie was asleep, but Raftalia sat up and Naruto helped her into her battle dress. Naruto asked, how do you feel? She replied, I have a little more energy, but I'm tired. It's hard to explain. Jiraiya said, just rest and wait for dinner to be done. Naruto, time to work on that arm. Naruto sighed and moved to Sylvie's side. He touched the scroll and 2 wooden splints, a roll of gauze and 2 bottles appeared on the scroll. He looked sympathetically at the girl and asked, are you ready? She nodded and replied, yes. Please fix what the man who looks similar to you that did this to me and erase that memory from me. He poured one of the bottles into the shield and a new shield appeared. Healing salve shield, chakra based healing will get a +5. Chakra control boost, small. Naruto tilted his head and changed his shield. The shield became a leather bracer with the kanji for doctor on it with a gem in the middle of the bracer. He waved Jiraiya over and showed it to him. Look, a new shield of sorts. It works on healing and chakra control, Naruto explained. He then continued, I'm not sure with the shield that I have enough strength to break bones right, so keep an eye on me and I might ask you to help with it. He then pushed chakra into another seal and padded bar appeared with several scrolls. There was a note on the scrolls. If you want to learn healing, read these scrolls. Naruto shook his head. He looked down at Sylvie and smiled warmly. He then said, bite down on this and I'm sorry for hurting you. He put the padded bar in her mouth. He then gently took her arm and put his hands on both sides of the bend. The bend was just above the wrist and could be taken for a birth defect, but upon closer inspection, you could tell it was too clean. Naruto gently said, on 3 I'm going to do this. He looked into her eyes and waited for her to acknowledge. He started counting, 1 2 and then used chakra to enhance his strength. The bones broke and she arched her back. She also bit down on the bit and screamed. Naruto continued to work the arm and crush the bone at the bend while straightening the arm. He then gently did what he could to move the bones in the area around to align them correctly. He had Jiraiya check his work. By this time Sylvie had passed out from the pain. Jiraiya nodded and he held the girl's hand in place while Naruto applied the splints and the gauze wrapping, making sure to secure both the arm and the hand. He then applied chakra to the wrap and it glowed green. He gently woke Sylvie up and said, drink this. She opened her mouth and drank the potion. Naruto then gently put her battle dress on and put her arm in a sling. She weakly smiled and said, thank you master. Naruto chuckled and said, I just hurt you more. Sorry. She shook her head and replied, you fixed what my half-brother did to me. Naruto looked angry and asked, half-brother? Sylvie nodded and replied, my family is noble, but the head of the house practices taking demi-human mates as concubines. My brother was born to my father's human wife, thus a noble. I was born a few years after. My brother didn't like me, nor did he like most demi-humans. I figure it was because of his mother. The demi-human children born from the nobles are trained as servants to the family. My brother despised me so much he broke my arm and made sure it healed this way. He then began to sell off the serving staff. He and his mother seemed to not be able to run the area very well and were going into debt. Thus, sold off the staff into slavery. He sold me off as one with a birth defect so that I would die in the slave merchant's cages from one of the nobles that like to torture and kill demi-humans or become a sex slave. I was worried that you were either one of those and my life would end. Thankfully, my fears were wrong. She shifted and winced. She then asked, how long will I have to wear this? Naruto read over the notes and replied, a week or 2 at least. Jiraiya came back and handed out fish on a stick to each of the campers. He then said, eat up. 4 in the morning, we begin your training. In both levels and shinobi arts. The 4 ate in silence while Raftalia looked at Naruto in wonder and Sylvie looked at him with devotion. Jiraiya looked at him with a smirk. Naruto looked down and didn't know what was going on with him. He at this point heard laughter in the back of his mind. His anger peaked a little, but he simmered down so as not to scare the girls. Later that night Naruto was on his watch shift with Jiraiya and the girls asleep. Raftalia suddenly began screaming, no. They're dead. No. They're dead. Mother, father, they're dead. Naruto quickly came over to the girl and pulled her into a hug and began to comfort her with brushing his hand down the back of her head. He also said quietly, it's okay. I understand. I'm here. Sylvie looked at the scene and smiled, as did Jiraiya. Jiraiya watched as Sylvie moved her sleeping bag over next to Raftalia's. A little later Naruto was asleep. He smiled as Naruto cradled the whimpering Raphtalia and Sylvie had her arm around Naruto. He stayed up until morning and prepared the breakfast. Naruto woke with both girls on him. Sylvie was laying on his right arm and using it as a pillow, while Raphtalia was snuggled into his chest. He looked up and saw Jiraiya, who just looked back and shrugged. Naruto quietly extracted himself. This caused both girls to groan in dissatisfaction. He then helped the older shinobi cook breakfast. The girls finally woke up to the smell of food. Raphtalia began to cough and Naruto handed her a conical leaf with a liquid in it. Naruto replied to the unasked question, "It is a cough medicine. It should help with a cold or other mild malady. I have also added some flavoring and had sensei try it to make sure it is at least palatable since I can't taste a thing right now." She drank it down. Well, it wasn't awful. It was somewhat bitter but had a smooth, slightly sweet taste. She said, "It doesn't taste good, but could it be worse?" Jiraiya chuckled and replied, "Yes, most medicines are bitter. Especially those that are first made." His first couple tries were just plain awful. So be happy I was your taste tester. Chapter 4 Training and a New Slave. Jiraiya sat the trio down and said, "I know that you should know this, Naruto, but in case you didn't, I'm going to go over it again so that you have the basics down. The abilities that Naruto and I use are chakra-based, not mana-based. There will be 3 basic techniques or jutsu that you will learn. You will also learn the escape jutsu so that you can get out of bindings and if you're captured. Also, Naruto, take the shackles off the girls. They will make noise and make it easier to bind them later." Naruto got up and formed a clone. He then formed a ball of energy in his and touched the shackles on the girl. Each shackle broke quickly under the jutsu. Jiraiya scowled and said, "You are going to learn to do that without a clone. Now for the first lesson. The energy that Naruto pushed into you started and enlarged your own chakra." Naruto showed them the position to start with, moving their chakra around. Naruto nodded and sat down in a senza position. He clasped his hands together and then said, "Reach down into yourself. Into your core. Where I push the chakra into you, and then when you can feel it, give it a light tug." Raphtalia concentrated and felt the energy in her core and then felt something warm move within her. She exclaimed, "I think I did it." Sylvie did the same thing but was awash in energy and it was apparent with a slightly yellow glow around her body. She then became lightheaded and everything went black. Naruto was quick to catch her from hitting the ground and looked to Jiraiya. Jiraiya sighed and said, "Looks like we have another overachiever. She should be fine. She is also still healing from an injury. The bandages may have taken some of her chakra and added to the healing. Which could be a good thing." Naruto gently laid Sylvie's head on his lap. Jiraiya then pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to Naruto. He then explained, "This is chakra paper. The girls are not advanced enough for this yet, but you are. Push some chakra into it and we will see what chakra type you are." Naruto pushed chakra into the paper and it split in half and half became wet to the point of it dripping. The other half crinkled and then ignited and burned to ash. Naruto looked surprised and asked, "What does it mean?" Jiraiya replied, "It means that sensei was an idiot and that you're a protege. Looks like you have wind and water in equal proportion. You also have lightning and fire in equal but lesser proportions. To do this right, I think we will need to use clones, but also be careful not to disturb your tenant. Let's start with water and fire." He then created 2 clones and then said, "Create a clone for each and they will work over there." Naruto nodded and complied. The clones went towards the stream and began to train. Sylvie woke up with her head on Naruto's lap. He then said, "Morning, sleepyhead." She blushed and looked up at Naruto but felt weird. She reached up to the collar around her neck and found it missing. "Where is my collar?" Naruto replied, "Did you forget I took it off earlier? Well, you may be a slave. I removed the signatures of that awful practice. Also, we will leave the seals for now since it will keep people from abducting you. I've set the seals to only stop you from attacking me. So, no more orders. I will give you orders but you will have to do as I say because you know it is the right thing to do. Remember, hesitation in battle can mean death for you or your comrades. We are a team now. Our job is to protect each other. You are to obey either Jiraiya sensei or myself. We will push you hard but you will also have time to relax and recover. Sylvie will not have to use her left arm in most or the training, at least until it heals. I will also develop a business to acquire more slaves and companions. This training will go both ways. Since sensei doesn't know the language, we will have you train him in it, and if you can read, we will buy books to learn the language's written language. The schedule will be chakra training, breakfast, fighting some monsters, lunch, shinobi training, that includes strength, stealth, and endurance, dinner, more chakra training, or book learning, and then bed. We will also move from day to day. I will send out some clones to learn some things that we need to know." Naruto created a clone and it changed into a peasant and then jumped off. Jiraiya clapped and said, "You might have what it takes to be a chunin. Now have a clone work on breakfast and you get to work on the Rasengan." Naruto pouted, "Ah. Both girls giggled at his antics. Jiraiya then began to instruct the girls on basic chakra theory. An hour later the group had breakfast. Jiraiya and Raphtalia became a force to be reckoned with as they tore through the basic monsters in the area. Naruto collected the parts that merchants would buy since his shield had enough of those components at the moment. Naruto and Sylvie would hold back, with Naruto blocking and Sylvie attacking with her good arm. The children gained several levels and were now level 4, and Jiraiya was level 7, while Naruto was only level 6. He watched as he continued to get the short end of the stick in experience. He did clear level 7 when he felt his clones burst and he got the memories. He looked at Jiraiya and the man nodded. Naruto knew now that shadow clones had held a secret that he had not known and was now going to exploit. Lunch was a quiet affair. After lunch, the girls went off with Jiraiya to do the physical aspects of their training. Naruto sent off 2 clones, one to practice water and one for fire. While he continued work on the Rasengan, Naruto laughed as Jiraiya had to carry both the girls back to dinner. The girls had a hard time studying more about chakra that evening and quickly fell asleep. It was another night of terrors for Raphtalia and snuggles for Sylvie. One of Naruto's clone that went into town earlier that day and had found out that he could get information from the dragon Hercules in the church. He explained it to Jiraiya after the girls had fallen asleep. Jiraiya had told him it might be better if he snuck in and did his business. The next morning was a repeat of chakra theory and training and then breakfast. Naruto left 2 clones to protect Sylvie while the others went hunting. He on the other hand went into town. He pushed his shield onto his back and transformed into a cloaked woman. He snuck into the church and listened into the conversations. He found the Hercules but didn't approach until the area was empty. Both the shield and Hercules reacted and gave him a timer of over 3 weeks. He continued to sneak around the church and heard the nuns and a father talk about giving dragon sand to the heroes when they gained some levels. He also discovered where they hid it. Well, where they stored it. It was a storeroom and unorganized piles of bags on shelves. So, he snuck a bag of the sand and poured it into the shield. It told him that he could use a teleport ability, but only after he had achieved level 60. He sighed and left the church and met up with Erhard. The pair discussed things like the other kingdoms and relations to Malmormark, where the kingdoms were located and such. His discoveries led him to decide to make a trip after the next wave to an adjoining country. He didn't like the idea of Frobrier Siltvold but did like Shieldforden. He noted that it might be too far to go to Shieldford in one go, but Frobrier Siltvold would be a good choice for getting some other dragon Herculeses with his shield. This would help him spread out and help other countries. He also asked where he could make money outside of Castle City, and Earhart suggested Loot Village not too far away to the southwest. He also had one more thing to do just after nightfall. He found the knight who lied against him. Naruto had transformed into a pretty woman and spiked the knight's drink with a sleeping potion. The knight was groggy and talked about a special prisoner that the king was hiding from the heroes, especially the shield hero. A pretty face will loosen lips, but the drug seemed to do more. The man thought he was going to have night with a beautiful woman, but woke up the next morning hanging, like an ornament, on the wall above the barracks, stark naked, tied with a note reading that he is a liar and couldn't be trusted. This note was hung around his neck in public display. It took the knights over 2 hours to get the man down when they eventually found him. The person who found him was a woman going to the market and reported a naked man to the castle guard. The knight was arrested for indecency. Naruto entered the camp late that night and found 2 very tired girls waiting on him. He smiled and told them that they were going to go to Loot Village and use that as a base of operations. On the way the group ran into several groups of the local rabbits or Usiple. While Raphtalia had problems with killing these animals, Naruto and Jiraiya didn't. They worked with Raphtalia to get over her fear of blood by helping prepare the animals. After about 4 she finally got over her fear of blood and killed one herself. Naruto and Jiraiya that night cleaned the weapons and tools. Sylvie accidentally dropped a whetstone on the shield and it had an interesting result. Creating the sharpening shield. They also fed the shield the Usiple fur and meat, garnering him another 2 shields. The second day they ran into a warren of Usiple and had to deal with 24 of them. The party, except for Jiraiya, were covered in blood. After taking care of the animals, Naruto took the girls to the river. Naruto exclaimed, "Clean your clothes off and then clean yourselves off." The girls replied, happily, "Okay." And began to strip in front of him at the riverbank. Naruto exclaimed, "What are you doing?" Sylvie replied, "Doing as our master ordered." As she shed the last of her clothes and moved off into the water, without a care in the world, Naruto watched stunned as the girls moved off. He had noticed that they had seemed to have grown in the last couple days. It appeared that they had aged a couple years. He blushed at what he saw and shook his head as he watched the naked backsides of the girls. He then turned and took his clothes off. He began to wash his shirt and jerkin first. He had not used his cloak or backpack and had left them in camp with Jiraiya. He had taken 3 towels with him for the trio to use. He was pleasantly surprised that the medicine had done wonders for Raphtalia's cough. Sylvie seemed to not be in much pain from the surgery that had fixed her arm. He had set out his tops on the beach to dry and was working on his pants and boxers now. He finished with them and worked on his body next. He sensed a presence near him and turned to find two blushing, naked girls looking directly at him. He sighed and walked over and grabbed towels. He handed them out. He kept on thinking, they are only 10 and 11, not around 14. Keep your mind on the job. He did notice their developing bodies, but said nothing. Sylvie wrapped the towel around herself and asked, did you like what you saw, Naruto-sama? Naruto sighed and replied, you're 11. Yes, I know that you demi-humans age differently as you level, but we should keep this professional. Liking or not liking isn't the point. Raftalia had turned and wrapped herself in a towel. She then said, if it's you I don't mind. You've been kind to me and helped me. Naruto was facing away from the girls and had just wrapped his towel around himself. He then said, this is part of what sensei warned us about. You both are pretty and I can tell that you're both going to become beautiful, but I don't know if I'm ready to open my heart again. Besides, I'm older than you guys by 4 and 5 years, respectively. I don't want to take advantage of you. Both Jiraiya and Bachan would kill me. He stood up. He felt two arms wrap around him and one was in a splint. He gulped as he felt her chest through the towel push against his back. She then said, you just proved that you wouldn't take advantage of us. We will follow you to the end of these waves and back to your world if necessary. We care deeply for you. We've only known you a week or so, but you've done so much for us that we want to do something for you. If only a little. Eventually we will become older than you, and we know that aging will slow when we hit about 18 or so. We're level 10 or so as a group with you lagging behind, but if you use clones you can catch up somewhat. Naruto touched the arms wrapped around him gently and tears welled up in his eyes. He then felt another set of arms wrap around him. Both the girls were just shorter than him, with Raftalia slightly shorter than Sylvie. He turned within the group hug and hugged the girls tightly. He quietly said, thank you. After a few minutes the hug broke and the girls walked away to collect their clothes. Naruto was teary-eyed and heard Jiraiya say, looks like you've done it. They love you. There is no way around it. Not sure what level Raftalia is at, but Sylvie's is definitely a romantic love. You've gotten lucky, my boy. The food is ready and let's keep them safe for you. Naruto wiped the tears from his eyes and collected his clothes. Naruto dressed behind a bush while the girls dressed behind another bush at camp. Jiraiya seemed content to keep an eye on the fire and the food. The trio sat around the fire with the girls sitting on either side of Naruto. Sylvie tasted the food and said, this tasted good, sensei. Jiraiya smiled and replied, it should. Naruto worked on the herbs for the seasoning. Even though he hasn't been able to taste since that incident with Sakura. He says it has only been a while, but time is relative in some things. Naruto had just taken a bite and was surprised that he could taste the food and it did taste good. He felt Sylvie lean into him and her ear brush against his. He smiled and ate another bite. He then thought, I might have actually found some people to trust other than Bachan and Sensei. He then said, yes, this does taste good. Jiraiya looked at the boy in astonishment and said, really you've opened your heart again. Naruto nodded and suddenly he got 4 updates for shields. He then exclaimed, I just got 4 new shields. Raftalia exclaimed, that's great. Sylvie smiled and blushed. She then said, I hope they will help all of us. Especially you, master. She leaned up and kissed him on the cheek. That night was busy with both Jiraiya, Raftalia and Naruto, learning the alphabet of this world and some basic words. Raftalia knew some words, but only the words, not necessarily the alphabet. Naruto also took off the brace and checked Sylvie's arm. He gently cleaned it and rewrapped it. He then said, it is healing well. The improvement in my chakra control and your improvement in chakra control and capacity is helping in the healing. I can run a basic diagnostic jutsu now. I can see that the bone is setting, but there are still too many microfractures in the bone. Also, with you growing. The bone is healing better than expected. You should be fully healed in about 4 or 5 days. The arm will be weak, but we can fix that with some intense work, but nothing too much. We don't want to re-injure it. Jiraiya chuckled and said, bravo. You sound like a medical shinobi. I'm impressed. Keep up the studies and can you do the Rasengan with one hand? Naruto raised his right hand and blue sphere began to form. He appeared to concentrate, but it wobbled for a second and then became stable. He then lifted his left hand. He repeated the same maneuver, but a little slower. He was sweating from the exertion. He then asked, is this good enough? Jiraiya clapped and replied, much improved, but you need to make it combat ready. Keep up the good work, though. We have a couple weeks left. So, keep at it and you should also keep at the elemental work. From what the crone told me we can learn magic too, but it is expensive. Sylvie turned to Jiraiya and said, Sensei, you've reverted to your native tongue. I'm getting the hang of it and can understand somewhat. Jiraiya sighed and replied as he reverted to the girl's native language, sorry, I will keep on trying to use your language. Sylvie shook her head and said, no, it is fine. I would like to learn Naruto-sama's language. We will keep working on both being able to learn both languages. We can keep enemies guessing what we are talking about. During the next day's chakra training, Sylvie walked over to a tree and began to walk up the tree. She made it up 2 meters and then had to jump back to land on her feet. Naruto smiled and said, I had problems with that one too. Just keep at it. I would run at it, but taking your time and making sure you have your footing is a good idea. Raftalia already has this down and is ready for water walking, but we also need to get her capacity up. Jiraiya smiled and shook his head. He then said, you may surpass Kakashi as a sensei. Naruto then asked, so what happened with him talking about me beating Sasuke? Jiraiya chuckled and replied, I asked Haim about that and she told me that the report said nothing other than you had beaten him at the valley and Kakashi picked him up from you. He had then rushed him back to the village. When she asked him about Sakura, he gave her the short story and apparently, she jumped to conclusions. You were cleared by the investigation. Sasuke lost his license for several years and is just getting out of prison. Here's the funny part. Sakura asked for Haim to train her about 6 months after we left. Well, Haim remembered having to go back and fix you after the work she did from your mission. She wasn't happy. She told her flat out no and she would have to get someone who had more time to help her to become stronger. She also told her that she was still on probation for attacking a fellow shinobi. Sakura was smart enough not to try and come up with some excuse of why she did it and just accepted punishment since she had been on D-rank missions for the last 6 months without being told a reason. She was given another 6 months probation for a total of a year. She has asked several jounin to train her, but only Kakashi has done so and he isn't giving her much other than some genjutsu. Most of your class have made chunin though other than Sasuke and Sakura. Given what you're doing here I might be able to get you a field promotion here. Now let me see that seal. Naruto nodded and sat down in front of Jiraiya. He lifted his shirt and made his chakra begin to flow. The seal showed on his stomach. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. Naruto noticed and asked, what? Jiraiya replied, there should have been some deterioration, but it seems to have been repaired somewhat for some reason. Might be the shield. Let's hope so. Just hope you don't get too emotional or you might get too angry and release that beast upon this world. Naruto wore a worried look and said, let's hope not. Naruto rolled out 2 sleeping bags and laid down. Raftalia took his left side and Sylvie took his right. Each girl took one side of his chest and quickly fell asleep. Naruto sighed and smiled warmly. Jiraiya rolled his eyes at the children's antics. The group spent the next few days going towards loot. Along the way they found several piku, a bird monster. They collected the feathers and the meat of the monsters. 2 days out from loot Naruto made one last trip to the castle town in Earhart. He took all of the loot in a sealing scroll and left several clones. After getting to Castle Town and selling his wares at the shops under a henge, he went to Earhart's and purchased a short sword and shield for each of the girls, along with a couple of leather breastplates. He also discussed a special purchase that Earhart said would be available later that day. He met with Belaukas and purchased a fox girl. Naruto entered the tent and Belaukas exclaimed, welcome back. My most favorite client. What are we looking for today? Naruto replied, I'm looking for a low-level mage. Belaukas smiled his usual greedy smile and replied, I have just what you need. She's a little on the lean side, but she is a mage. Naruto looked at the girl in the cage. She was a fox, but her fur was a dull silver. Her level showed to be 6. He could see her ribs through her skin and she looked to be near death. Her health bar was a sickly green color and it was at about 2/3. He commented, she looks sick and malnourished. Yes, but she is the only mage that I have period. I've fed her, but she hasn't responded too well. I'm guessing since you've helped those girls you have. I'm betting that you can help her too. I'll make you a deal. 1 gold since she is a fox demi-human, Belaukas asked. Naruto shook his head and replied, no, I'll give you 75 with a 5 silver as the processing fee. Her eyes looked hopeful at the prospect of getting out of the cage. Belaukas laughed and replied, that is why you're my best customer. You can give me a good deal. Deal. Let's get the paperwork finished and her transferred to you. He opened the cage. Naruto bent down and entered the cage. He picked her up bridal style and removed her from the cage. She felt light to him and barely there. They entered the inner tent for the seal for transferring the slave seal. Naruto held her while Belaukas did the transfer process. Naruto sat her down on a chair and paid the man. He broke the shackles and took the girl out of the tent. He gave her a pill and a potion. She had a problem swallowing the pill, but just after it went down with the potion, she began to glow. Her health bar turned to the regular color and moved to about 3/4. He went to a clothier and bought a dress and some undergarments that should fit her. He then went to a bathhouse. He took off his clothes and then took off her clothes. She didn't fight him. He washed her and noticed that she didn't fight him, but he didn't say anything. He rinsed her off and then cleaned himself off and then took her into the bath. She was stiff while she lay against him in the bath. After about 10 minutes in the bath, she fell asleep. After another 5 minutes he lifted her out of the bath and dried her off. He dressed her in the new clothes and himself. He then carried her to a tavern and she woke to the smell of food. He had already ordered food for the two of them. He smiled at her and said, "Good afternoon, sleepyhead. Did the bath feel good?" She asked, "Did I please you, master?" Naruto replied, "Nothing happened. Other than you getting some sleep. You need some food and then we can discuss your job." The food was put on the table and the waiter said, "Here you go." Naruto replied, "Thank you." He turned to the girl and said, "Go ahead and eat. I would also like to know your name." She took a couple bites and replied, "Millie. Am I to be a concubine?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "No, you are a mage and are going to help me in my party. I will fill you in more when we reach the rest of the party. My name is Naruto. That is all I can say for now. Now eat. We are going to get you some books for learning magic and whatever you need." She looked up at him in confusion and asked, "Why?" Naruto smiled warmly and replied, "Because I need you. Also, my team needs you, but I need you." She then looked down at what she was wearing and said, "You bought me new clothes." Naruto smiled and replied, "Yep, and Ino told me how to buy clothes for girls." I hope she was right. Do you not remember going into the store to buy them? She smiled weakly and replied, "They are nice." I'm sorry master, I don't remember. She then continued to eat. She then asked, "Why the bath?" Naruto replied, "You needed it. Sorry if it made you feel uncomfortable, but it was easier to take one with you than to just get wet and bathe you." She shook her head and said, "You are my master and thus you own me. You can do what you want with my body." Naruto scowled and lifted her chin to look at her and said, "I may be your master, but that doesn't mean that I can have my way with you. We will talk about this later. Eat some more, but not too fast, since your body isn't used to eating and is malnourished. We'll go to the magic shop next and get the books. After that we will get you some battle accessories or armor." She nodded as she finished the food and replied, "As you wish master." Naruto left the money for the meals on the table and helped Millie up and out of the tavern. They entered the magic shop and the old lady there was amiable. She asked, "What can I do for you?" Millie replied, "Can you test my master's affinity?" She smiled and replied, "Why yes. Just touch this crystal ball." Naruto touched the ball and continued, "You have rare affinity for healing and support magic. Your turn, young lady." Millie touched the crystal ball and she explained, "You have the affinity for fire and illusion, not surprising, since you're a half fox. Now you wanted to buy some books." Naruto nodded his head and replied, "Yes, how much would a grimoire be?" The lady smiled and replied, "Basic books would be about 1 to 2 gold pieces depending on the type of magic. For the higher levels it can cost up to 15 or more gold. A crystal ball can be up to 50 gold. Naruto grimaced and replied, "I would like a fire and a healing grimoire please." The woman smiled and replied, "That will be 2 gold." Naruto sighed and pulled out 2 gold coins. The woman placed the books on the counter. He then said, "Thank you." He then put them into his pack. He and Millie then went to Earhart's shop and got her a battle dress, especially for her being a mage. Earhart teased, "Are you creating a harem of young girls?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "No, just happen to be only girls that I've had the choices to get. Yes, they are slaves, but better to get slaves and make their lives easier than to have them die because they are neglected." Earhart smiled and said, "You've got a good heart. She's looking on the light side, isn't she?" Naruto nodded and replied, "Yeah, she was sick and malnourished when I got her. She isn't sick anymore, but I figure we can fix the malnourishment by the time the wave gets here." Earhart smiles and says, "You've got a lot of cuties on your hands." Naruto blushed and replied, "They are all dear to me. I'm hoping that Millie will become dear to me too." Millie came out of the dressing room wearing her battle dress and staff. She also had a dagger at her side. Earhart smiled and said, "Looking great little miss." Naruto then turned to Earhart and asked, "You got those special orders?" Earhart nodded and replied, "Glad your clone cleared up that letter. I can't read your native language." He pulled out a box and opened it. He then explained, 50 of those kunai things and 100 of those shuriken things that you and Jiraiya use. Per your request. Full order 35 silver. I'm working on more for you guys for when the wave arrives." Naruto smiled and replied, "Worth every silver. Thanks for making more." He pulled out a bag of silver and placed it down on the counter. He then said, "Only about 1 gold and 90 silver left. Got to get some more to get ready for the wave since we have a little over 2 weeks left. Knowing the girls, they will want me to upgrade my armor when I return." Earhart then explained, "You understand how to adjust the breastplates for the girls?" Naruto nodded and replied, "Yes, and thanks again." Earhart chuckled and replied, "No problem, be careful and come back." Naruto nodded and sealed the box away. He then bent down and bade Millie to mount his back. She tentatively got on his back and they left the town. As soon as they left the town the speed increased massively. Naruto had to use chakra to stick Millie to himself. Millie seemed quiet during the trip back. The piggyback ride back to the camp at a speed that was both exhilarating and scary. Naruto arrived in the late afternoon with Millie. He showed her a place for her in camp. He explained, "Millie, you can sleep anywhere you like within the camp. I will not use the slave crest to order you. I'm not that type, but please do not run off since you're not strong enough to defend yourself right now. I may be your owner, but that doesn't mean I'm going to abuse that privilege. You're a valuable member of my team. Your level is lower than the others right now, and we need to rise to meet the level of the others. We also have some different training that we do other than the standard training. Now that we have a mage, we will be using you to help train us in magic. If you notice the extra bar that you lack from the others." She nodded and he continued, "That is chakra. We use it in ways that will help us in the waves. I will now explain. I'm the shield hero." Her eyes went wide and he saw admiration and the fear that was in them disappeared. He went on, "As the shield hero, I can only defend well sort of. I have a trick up my sleeve and it is clones that are solid and can do damage. That is the reason I have a weapon on my side. With your help we will learn magic and be more diverse and stronger than before. As you can see, we are sitting at about level 10. We've worked hard for those levels and you will too. We work as a team and will help you along. I will make sure that you're fed and we will work through any fear that you have. Do you have any questions?" She nodded meekly and asked, "Are you going to take me as a concubine?" Naruto sighed and replied, "I'm not worried about sex right now. Well, you are pretty and will become even more beautiful. We have more to worry about that whether I get lucky with you or the other girls. I didn't buy you for that purpose. You have skills that I need. I will eventually set you free. If you want to be with me later on, that is up to you. Work hard and I'll protect you. I promise." She smiled and said, "Thank you Naruto-sama. I will serve you to the best of my abilities." She bowed deeply. A deep voice caused her to turn and run behind Naruto. It exclaimed, "Got another girl?" Naruto sighed and replied, "Yeah, she is a mage and has some skills. We start her on the initial stages of chakra training tomorrow. Oh, by the way, I will need to see your stomach to get your chakra started." She sighed and replied, "As my master. If you need me to strip naked then that is what I will do. Since you've already seen me naked." Sylvie giggled and said, "You can, but he gets embarrassed when you do that. He likes it, but gets embarrassed." Naruto blushed and exclaimed, "Sylvie-chan." Jiraiya took a thinking pose and said, "This one looks a little bit skimpy to me." Naruto replied, "She was sick and is malnourished. I've already took care of the sickness and the malnourishment will take time. So tomorrow we will be working on chakra and spells. Alright Millie, we will get to starting your chakra." Sylvie helped Millie out of her battle dress and helped her lay down on the sleeping bags. She moved the undergarments away from Millie's navel. Naruto's hand became engulfed in a blue flame. He touched her stomach and she bucked at the touch. She screamed in pleasure and pain. After she passed out a minute later, Naruto did switched shields and did several hand signs. He ran his hand over the girl and smiled warmly. He looked at his status screen and saw that Millie now had a slowly filling chakra bar. The next morning was the usual training schedule with a clone of Jiraiya giving Millie instruction on chakra. Breakfast was an interesting affair for Millie since she watched Naruto fix the food and Sylvie and Raphtalia swoon over the food. Jiraiya laughed at the girl's antics. Millie got an actual smile at what was going on. The group went hunting and found several monsters to hunt. This helped all of them to level, especially Millie, who got a better boost from Naruto's slave shield than the other girls since the monsters were becoming under-leveled and giving lower experience. After dinner the group worked on learning written language and spoken for Jiraiya. Naruto did a diagnostic on both Sylvie and Millie before bed. Both girls were improving. The sleeping arrangements were similar to before, with Millie sleeping close to the trio but in another sleeping bag. The next day the group entered Lude and Jiraiya moved off from the group. He was given a book and more instructions before he departed. Naruto and the girls entered the village and entered the market. They found a couple vendors and sold their wares for about 20 silver. Naruto then asked one vendor, "Is there a way to make more money fairly quickly?" The vendor replied, "While looking at the mountain, the mine has some valuable ore in it, but it is infested with monsters. I don't know what our glorious heroes are doing, but until the mines are cleared out, mining can't continue. I'm sure if you clear out the mines that the mayor and the lord of the town will pay handsomely for anything that you bring out." Naruto smiled and said, "Thanks for the information." The man waved and replied, "No problem. Have a good day, kid." Naruto and the girls came upon the mining camp and scoured the area. He found some abandoned pipes and the shield glowed. Shrugging his shoulders and fed them to the shield and got the pipe shield with a skill of shield prison, he smiled in glee for finding a new shield. He then found a shed with more supplies. He picked up a pickaxe and the shield again glowed. He chuckled darkly and again fed the shield. This time he acquired the pickaxe shield with a skill mining skill +1. He picked up some rope and again the shield glowed. He began to laugh and fed the shield the rope. He acquired the rope shield with the skill airstrike shield. The girls came to the shed and Sylvie asked, "Is everything alright, Naruto-sama?" Naruto changed shields and pointed his arm. He then put his arm up and exclaimed, "Airstrike shield." A green translucent shield appeared before him. He then exclaimed, "Never better. Never better." He grabbed a couple pickaxes and handed one to Raphtalia and held the other himself. He then crossed, then made a familiar hand sign and exclaimed, "Shadow Clone Jutsu." 3 Narutos appeared in the shack. The original handed Sylvie a torch. Millie exclaimed, "So cool." Raphtalia replied, "I know. Right. I want to do that too." Naruto then said, "Alright, the clones are guards. Raphtalia and I are to be the miners. Sylvie and Millie are to be support." The group replied, "Yes sir." The group then entered the mine. Naruto changed his shield to the pickaxe shield. After a while of walking, they entered a magnificent cave with lots of crystals. Naruto and Raphtalia began to mine the ore. Naruto put the first ore into his shield and got another new shield. The light metal shield with a skill of defense +1. He found some other ores and was able to get some chunks of them too, thus getting shields for them too. The ores were iron, copper, silver, and lead. Lead was a defense up, copper and iron were smelting, while silver was a damage reduction from demons. He thought to himself, "I'm getting too lucky. There has to be a catch." He then heard Raphtalia drop her pickaxe and silently exclaim, "Dog monster." Over and over. The two-headed dog was level 15, while the group minus Millie were level 11. It would be a fairly even fight if they were a regular party. Naruto changed shields to the rope shield and two of his clones disappeared. The dog monster charged at Raphtalia. She screamed and Naruto exclaimed, "Airstrike shield." A transparent green shield appeared before Raphtalia and blocked the dog's path. Sylvie charged the dog and hit with her sword just below the ribcage and backed off. Millie then exclaimed, "As source of thy power, decipher the laws of nature and burn my target." First fire arrow. An arrow made of fire appeared and shot at the dog, hitting it. The dog yelps in pain at the attacks. Raphtalia is still in shock from seeing the dog. Naruto is now wrapping an arm around the girl, and the clones that disappeared suddenly appear just below the necks of each dog head and thrust upwards. Each kunai finds its mark and the dog whimpers for a second and then collapses. Raphtalia is still frightened of the dog, but the clones begin to butcher it. Naruto asks, "Was it the one that attacked your village?" Raphtalia shook her head into his chest and replied, "No. It had 3 heads, but I'm still scared." Naruto rubbed her back and slowly walked her over to the dead monster. He then said, "As the shield hero and as Naruto Uzumaki, I will protect you. You and Sylvie will be my swords, and Millie will be my mage. We will also try to make sure that other children don't see a wave cause this type of fear happen to them. When you're ready, let me know what happened and we'll talk about it." He then smiled and said, "Take your sword out and stab it. I know it is dead, but at least it will be symbolic." Where am I getting these words? Raphtalia smiled and wiped away the tears. She pulled out her sword and wearily approached the monster. She then stabbed the monster. Tears again began to flow, and she began to stab the dead creature again and again and again, while screaming and crying. Naruto quickly wrapped her with a hug and she dropped the sword. She weakly said, "I'm sorry." He smiled and said, "There is no need to be sorry. There is a lot of pent-up anger, fear, and other emotions. We will work on those as best as we can. Now let me feed this monster to my shield and we can move on to harvesting some more ore." Raphtalia squeezed tighter and shook her head. She pleaded and asked, "A little longer, please." Naruto smiled and replied, "Of course." Millie looked at Sylvie and asked, "Is Master so caring about his slaves?" Sylvie replied, "He loves his slaves. Not in a perverted way, but in a familial way. I want to be his mate, but he is also hurting and wants to have us grow before we or he can work on that part of our lives. Also, we have waves of catastrophe to deal with. If you come to love Naruto the way I do, then that is fine, but if you find another, I'm sure that he will let you go to them when we are done." Millie became contemplative. She then looked at Naruto hugging Raphtalia warmly and comforting the girl as she looked at the monster. His clones continued to butcher the monster. After a little bit, the Raphtalia let Naruto go and he began to feed the monster to his shield. He smiled and changed his shield to an iron shield with 2 dog heads on it. He then changed it back to the mining shield and finished feeding the monster to his shield. The group continued to mine for several hours more. The group was now at the inn and had a large amount of food in front of them. Naruto then exclaimed, "Good job everyone. With the clearing of the dog monster and the ore that we recovered, we got a good amount of money. So, eat up and we'll go hunting in the morning." Chapter 5: A side trip before the wave. Naruto sat and watched as the girls went through their chakra training exercises. He had already gotten a new shield today by accident. The butterfly shield. He watched as a butterfly landed on the jewel and was absorbed. He was alerted to a new shield, the butterfly shield. He sighed and worried that the shield was going weird on him and was going to absorb just about anything. Then a thought hit him. What if I use cutting of their hair and my hair on the shield? Heck, the girls do need to have their hair cut. It is getting in the way of their eyesight and might get in their way, he pondered. He switched to the medical research shield and began to pick up herbs. He knew that they had about a week and a half left before the wave. The group level was about level 20, with Naruto and Millie trailing behind. Naruto had also informed Millie about the false charges against him. She began to laugh at the charges after how he had treated her on the first day. She even said that she would welcome him taking her eventually. That caused Naruto to blush. His senses blared and he jumped up. A large porcupine burst through the bushes near where he had just been. He changed shields to the light metal shield. He threw a special shuriken back towards the girls. It had a whistle on it. The girls turned quickly and headed towards Naruto, blocked the porcupine and deflected it to the side. It growled at him. He jumped back only a few meters, but still had its attention. "Hey, Spiky. Nice try. Come and get me," he exclaimed. It charged only to have several kunai impact into each side of it. Sylvie appeared behind it and slashed with her sword. It screamed in anguish and died. Raphtalia looked around and asked, "Are there any more?" Naruto shifted his shield to the dog shield and concentrated. He replied, "No, it appears that it was alone. Let's butcher this one and start our day of leveling." He pulled a few spines and fed them to the shield and got the animal needle shield. He chuckled and said, "An attack bonus shield." The girls celebrated. They also sealed the meat and bones into a scroll for later use. Sylvie hugged Naruto and said, "Finally, now you can start to get on the front lines with us. Instead of using your clone so much." She blushed and broke the hug and said, "We need to get stronger girls for Naruto-koi." Raphtalia said, "Yes, for Naruto-kun." Millie said, "For Naruto-sama." Several hours later the group was up against a bear. Naruto said, "Sylvie, Raphtalia, keep the front, but don't let it hit you." Millie, "Hit it with a fire spell. As shield hero, the source of thy power, decipher the laws of nature, defend my target fast guard." Sylvie began to glow. Naruto then exclaimed again, "As shield hero, the source of thy power, decipher the laws of nature, defend my target fast guard." Raphtalia began to glow. He then said, "Go girls." Millie, "Cover then with flame arrows." Millie replied, "Yes master. As a source of my power. I order thee, decipher the laws of nature and burn my target like a burning flame, first flame arrow." She held her hands forward and pointed, then between her companions and a flaming arrow formed. It then shot forward and hit the bear in the chest. The bear roared in pain and looked directly at Millie, but then was struck by Raphtalia and then Sylvie in succession. The bear appeared confused as to which target to attack. Naruto then charged full speed at the bear with a light metal shield equipped. He ran into the bear with such force that the bear flew back several meters. Naruto then did several hand signs and called out, "Fire style. Fireball jutsu." It hit the bear directly in the face. The bear was blinded. Sylvie came in and swung up with her sword and cut the bear's throat. There was a gurgle and then the bear fell dead. Naruto used the rope shield and tied up the bear to make sure it was dead. Raphtalia then plunged her sword into the bear's chest and made doubly sure by piercing its heart. Experience points racked up all around. Raphtalia quickly began to field dress the bear and seal the kill. Sylvia cleaned the weapons and Millie collected the clothes from Sylvie and Raphtalia. At this point, Naruto had become mostly desensitized to seeing the girls in various states of undress. If they weren't totally naked. He made sure that he wouldn't be looking at them for any particular reason at those times. Not that they would have minded. Each wanted his attention for their own reason. Especially Sylvie. The group set up camp and finished dinner and was working on reading lessons. Naruto had finished his lessons on healing and had learned one support magic spell one of his clones had seen done. Sylvie and Millie had finished the book on fire spells and now needed second level fire spells. They also wanted to know what Raphtalia's magic ability was so that they could get her training started. The group took a dip in the stream together and Naruto had to say that he was slightly jealous. They were now all older than him with only Sylvie not really looking that much older. Sylvie had a lithe body with a small chest. He estimated that they all were about 17 and were not afraid to show him their bodies. Raphtalia had grown from a child to a nice figured young woman with a medium chest, as did Millie. Millie was no longer with skin and bones. She had gained some fat and some muscle. The fat was in the right places and so she no longer looked emaciated. A beautiful woman had shown through. Naruto said, "You look a lot better now, Millie." Millie blushed and replied, "You really think so?" Naruto replied, "Yes. You look much healthier. You look starved like before. Now you look like a healthy woman." She stood and posed. She then asked, "Do you like what you see?" Naruto-sama. Naruto blushed and replied, "What man wouldn't? I also know that we can't do that because we have work to do." Sylvie giggled and said, "We will have to wait for that, Millie." Naruto-koi is still a little shy and while he is over his crush of she who shall not be named we all know what we must do. There is work that must be done. I know that I would love to be Naruto-koi's wife, but we need to make sure that we get these waves taken care of and see that what happened to Raphtalia-chan's village doesn't happen to another village. I know the urge is great, but we must fight it and persevere. Raphtalia smiled and said, yes. Naruto-kun is the shield hero, and if we can make it to the area of Idle Rabier, we might be able to rescue some of my friends or some of the people in the castle. Naruto leaned back in the warm water. He and a couple of clones had cleaned out an area in the stream bed. They then filled it with water, allowed the water to settle, and then heated it with fire jutsu. After some more idle conversation and some teasing, the group dried off, got dressed, and went to bed. Naruto left several clones with the girls that morning after breakfast. He explained, I have something to do. I'll be gone most of the day and should be back tonight. I might be late, so be gentle on the clones. He then jumped off in a northern direction. After a few hours, he was met by Jiraiya. He then said, hey pervy sage. Jiraiya asked, what are you doing away from the girls? Naruto sighed and explained, I have to save the slaves that are being held by Idle Rabier. His castle is nearby. Jiraiya smiled and said, good. I was about to pay that man a visit. I want you to make him vanish. After what I learned about him from some of the queen's people, I was asked if we could eliminate him and have it look like a rival, an accident, or a natural death. It is your choice on how to do it. Just do it correctly. We are not to be either seen or blamed for his death. Naruto sighed and said, so an assassination mission. I think I have just the item for it. He pulled out a vial from his pouch. Jiraiya nodded and replied, like I said, the method is up to you. Just make sure that you are not found out. That is the key to success. You pass or fail by whether you are found out. I will be watching. Also, getting the slaves out will be an added to your trial. This will be your Chunin exam. Naruto nodded and suddenly did a henge, changing into an average-looking woman. He changed his shield into his doctor's shield. She wore flowing pants and a ruffled blouse. Her hair was brown as were her eyes. Her build was medium. She had no distinguishing characteristics. Naruto looked at Jiraiya and asked with a wink, do I look good, Jiraiya-sama? Jiraiya chuckled and replied, perfect cover for an assassin. Good luck. Naruto continued through the trees and then landed a little ways from the castle. She then walked into the castle. The guards didn't give her even a second glance. Naruto made his way up to the keep and into the main courtyard. He discreetly made a couple of clones that looked like a couple of random guards and sent them down what looked like a dungeon entrance. The main Naruto slipped into the main manor and kept watch on guards and the comings and goings of each person. He eventually figured out who Idle Rabier was. He changed into a maid and was able to spike his tea with a slow-acting poison from the kitchen. He made sure to wipe the cup after Rabier drank the tea. He left the main building and changed himself into a guard. He then made his way to the dungeon and found a girl barely alive. He had his clones watch for other guards. He undid his henge and ran a diagnostic jutsu on the girl. She was suffering from a nearly fatal case of tuberculosis. Naruto immediately gave her a nutrition pill and cast a spell quietly, as shield hero, the source of thy power, decipher the laws of nature, heal my target first heal. He then used potion amplification and gave her a healing potion. Her eyes opened and she looked up and asked weakly, are you the shield hero? Naruto smiled and replied, yes I am. She asked, will you marry me? He chuckled and replied, you're a little young, but if you grow some, we can talk about it. She looked saddened and said, I'm not long for this world. Naruto grimaced and said, if you want to marry me then you have to fight harder than that. I can heal you. I already healed Raphtalia. This seemed to perk up the pink-haired weasel girl. She nodded as he gave her another potion. A clone herded another 5 kids into the cell. He began to heal all of them. Their faces were amazed when he said shield hero in his spells. Naruto said quietly, please keep it down. I will get you out of here, but I need to figure out how to do that and get you past the guards without them seeing or hearing you. He finished healing them and said, we'll make our break around the middle of the night when the guards are at their weakest. I have a couple of clones working on their shifts and such. The children headed back to their cells with a clone, each of whom blended into the shadows. Naruto then told the girl he had saved from death's door, when the guard comes to check you, I want you to barely breathe and make sure it is raspy and cough lightly, but make it sound like you are about to die. The girl nodded and replied, yes, my future husband. My name is Rafana. Naruto nodded. Rafana laid down in the position that Naruto had found her in and he hid in the shadows. When the guard came to check on her, she made the shallow breaths like Naruto had told her to. The guard shook his head and said, this one is about to perish. Maybe we should just put her out of her misery. The other guard shook his head and exclaimed, no way. Rabier-sama would kill us for letting a demi get some relief. Let her die. We can call our rounds done and head back. It looks like it will be a quiet night tonight. The first guard nodded his head as he exited the cell and said, I really hate this place. I really want to get out of here. The pair left the dungeon. Naruto and his clones collect the slaves again and say, for us to get out of here, I need each of you to put a drop of blood on one of these pieces of paper and then leave them in your cells. It will leave an illusion of yourselves for about a week's time and then the illusion will quit in 7 nights. Each child pricked their finger and took a piece of paper. They left with a clone. Naruto pricked Rafana's finger and touched it to the paper. He then said, Fuinjutsu. Hide the living with illusionary death seal. He picked her up and created a clone who left the paper where she had been laying. He smiled and waited for the others to return. With the help of the clones, the group quietly made their way to the top of the stairs. A solo clone waved the first 2 clone slave groups to the shadows of the courtyard before a guard made his rounds. The next 2 made their way to the shadows. Like the first pair and were hidden from the passing guard. Naruto, Rafana, solo clone, and the last pair made their way to the shadows. They waited for the guards to make their rounds and then the group jumped up to the top of the building and quickly down the other side. As Naruto looked down and noticed the slave crest on Rafana turn to smoke and wisp away. He knew then the Trabier was dead. After clearing the curtain walls, Naruto and his clones turned up the speed and headed out to the west. He found an area where he felt Jiraiya was and landed with his clones. Jiraiya was talking with a thin man with glasses and said, now you understand that you must not tell anyone what you know. The man smiled and laughed lightly. He then said, I know nothing, Jiraiya-kun. Your pupil is here, but there seems to be a lot more of him than I would have expected. Jiraiya chuckled and turned around. He raised an eyebrow and asked, were you seen? And how did you get out with them? Naruto replied, I used an illusionary death seal. Jiraiya chuckled and said, good call. He turned to the man in front of him and said, this is Van Reichnet. He will hide those demi-humans and see to their safety. You can come back for them if you want to later. We have about a week before the wave hits. I see that you've gotten them up to around level 30 and 25. Like yourself. The old coot said I'm a fire and earth type. You got any books on those types of magic? Naruto nodded and replied, got a first level fire magic book and you can have it. Both Millie and Sylvie have finished it. Need to get another book for illusion for Millie and wind for Sylvie. I also need a level 2 healing and a support book for me. I do know one support spell, but that is all. One of my clones saw it from someone else and I copied it and it worked after several attempts. I also have those fire and water jutsu down. Reichnet smiled and said, you seem very competent, Naruto-kun. I will make sure to take very good care of these refugees. It looks like this one especially doesn't want you to go. He smiles warmly at Rafana snuggling into Naruto's chest. Naruto sighs and replied, she asked me to marry her and I don't know how to respond. Reichnet smiled and gently took the girl from Naruto. He then said, after the wave, you can collect her and any of the others that wish to join your party. She will grow up fast and you can decide when she grows up. Naruto sighed and asked, why does this keep happening to me? Jiraiya laughed and replied, you have the devil's luck. You must be collecting a harem. Naruto scowled and said, I need you to work with me on lightning and wind. Jiraiya nodded but said, a week isn't enough to learn either wind or lightning. I will also help you in the wave though. So, I will accompany you back to the castle and we will re-equip. He then patted Naruto on the back and said, good job, Chunin Uzumaki. Naruto smiled and nodded. Naruto handed Rafana to Reichnet. The pair then headed back to the camp where the girls were and left the refugees and the clones guards with Reichnet. Chapter 6 Return and a new companion. Naruto and Jiraiya began the trek to the camp with the girls. Naruto asked, so what does the queen have to say? Jiraiya sighed and replied, she is quite angry with her husband the king. He was not supposed to be in charge and he especially was not supposed to summon all of the heroes. They were supposed to be summoned in a country one by one. You might have been summoned in either Shieldford or Silpald. Now she has to play damage control and avert a war with other nations. I would also note that slavery is common in this kingdom and the nobles love it, especially with demi-humans. Except those like Reichnet. Naruto asked. Jiraiya nodded and replied, yes, he and the former noble from Sayat region. His daughter is missing too. Naruto took a thinking pose with his hand on his chin while the pair were running quickly along. He then said, I may have a line on her. I think she may be a prisoner in the castle dungeon in the capital. Jiraiya exclaimed, we need to save her. Naruto smiled and said, I plan to. Even if it gets the king mad. He chuckled. Jiraiya shook his head and sighed. You're just a troublemaker, Jiraiya said with a chuckle. The pair continued to talk and laugh as they headed back to the camp. They entered the camp to find Sylvie on guard duty. She quickly ran and hugged Naruto. He chuckled and blushed. He then asked, did you miss me? Sylvie smiled and kissed him on the cheek. She then replied, of course, we missed you. Especially me, Naruto Koi. Did something exciting happen? The trio sat down by the fire and Naruto replied, I've been promoted and have something to tell Raphtalia when she gets up. I won't spill the beans until then. We will be heading back to the capital tomorrow. It should take a couple days and we will have a week to prepare. Sylvie snuggled close to Naruto. She noticed that he only became slightly uncomfortable with the affection from her. She smiled at this. Jiraiya smiled at the pair. He then said, "I'll take a watch and let you guys sleep." Naruto said, "Thanks Arasanen." The pair got up and walked over to the other two girls. Naruto laid down and the girls curled up to Naruto. Sylvie laid down next to Naruto and curled up to his other side and quickly fell asleep. The group woke up and quickly got ready for the day. Naruto fixed breakfast. As he served breakfast, Naruto explained, "Raphtalia, I have something to tell you." This got the girl's attention. He continued, "Last night I went on a mission. I was able to save a friend of yours, Rafana." This caused her to tear up and smile widely. He continued, "I also found 5 others in the dungeon and was able to free them also. Now, none of you must ever tell anyone about what I'm about to tell you." He watched each of the girls nod before he continued, "I ended Idol Rapier. Meaning I killed him, but if you're asked, I was here with you leveling up. Do you understand?" He looked at each and they all nodded in turn. He then smiled, "Well, killing another person isn't something to be proud of, it isn't the first time I've done it. Also, this was a mission and got me a commendation in my village. I'm now a Chunin. The next level in my shinobi career. Next will be my Jounin test." Jiraiya then spoke up, "Given his showing in the invasion of our village nearly 3 years ago, his capture of rogue shinobi, Sasuke Uchiha, his training, with me and here on this planet, and this last mission. He has proven that he is ready to become Chunin in both my opinion and the 5th Hokage's opinion. We will give you a vest later if you want it. Until then we will keep that information secret. Now let's go through the list of levels. Raphtalia, 31, Sylvie 32, Millie, 25, Naruto, 21, and myself, 28. Only Raphtalia and myself don't have spells, but I have elemental jutsu. Have you girls mastered the basic 3 jutsu?" All 3 girls answer at the same time, "Yes sir." He then handed out paper to each and said, "Push a little chakra into the paper. This will be for training after the wave since I expect none of you to perish in the wave. Naruto has pushed you into teamwork and how to work together. Now show me your chakra affinities." Raphtalia pushed chakra into the paper and it split in half. Jiraiya said, "Wind." Sylvie pushed chakra into the paper and it became soaked. He said, "Water." Millie pushed chakra into the paper and it began to turn into ash. Jiraiya said, "Fire." This is a good mix of elements. With mine fire, wind, earth, water, yin and yang. Naruto cocked his head and asked, "Yin and yang chakra?" Jiraiya replied, "Eat while I explain. Yin is creation chakra. I could create something. Say I have no water and I want to use a water jutsu. I would create it with my chakra using yin release. If I want to give life or energy to an object or a jutsu, that would be yang. I would say that making the Kyuubi would have been both a yin and yang feat by the sage of 6 paths." Naruto nodded his head while the girls wore a look of confusion. Naruto replied, "I get it, not really." Jiraiya chuckled and replied, "You'll understand more in your sage training, but that will be after the wave. So will be the elemental training for the girls. Now finish up breakfast. We have a week until the wave and I want you guys to get supplies and the extra goods sold off. We also want you to get check up on the other heroes. You will also need to work on some new spells. Since we're going to buy some more books. I just be reading the one you have on fire magic and Millie will be training me on it on the way." Millie got a look on her face and said, "So the student becomes the master." Jiraiya chuckles and replies, "In this case, yes. You are more versed in magic and I need to learn. We need to learn about Raphtalia and get her trained up on magic." The girls in unison exclaim, "Yes sir." Naruto has already broken down the tent and folded up the sleeping bags. The girls have noticed that he is already working and begin to clean the dishes and finish cleaning camp. It takes the better part of the day to get to the capital. Naruto uses henge to change into a nondescript person and Jiraiya follows behind at a distance. The girls act quiet around Naruto as they enter the castle wall so as to not attract attention. They find several merchants and sell off their wares. Naruto transforms into himself and enters the apothecary. He sells some of his herbs and medicines. Naruto asks, "So what will sell better?" "The herbs or the finished medicines?" The apothecary replies, "Because of the waves, the medicines will sell better. I will buy them off of you." Since Naruto had gotten along well with this man before, he knew that he would be treated fairly and left with some new instruments and more money than he expected. He did save some for his party to be sure. The next stop was to the witch's magic shop. She was still happy to see Naruto and his party as before. They tested Raphtalia. Witch said, "Dearie, you're half raccoon, it looks like you are both light and dark magic user. I would specialize in illusion magic because of your heritage. As for the books, it will be 2 gold pieces." Naruto raised an eyebrow and asked, "Why so little for 3 books and 2 of them are 2nd level?" He put the coins on the counter and put the books into his backpack. She blushed and replied, "You are friends with that handsome Jiraiya, aren't you?" Naruto nodded and said, "Yeah, but what does that have to do with it?" She smiled and said, I knew that was why he asked all those questions and is in my store right now. Jiraiya appeared in a corner and said, listen witch. She blushed and said, you say the kindest things Jiraiya-kun. Jiraiya sighed and asked, what do you want from me? She replied, I would like you to take me out on a date. Jiraiya looked at Naruto and asked, you hold the purse strings. Naruto pulled out several silver coins and tossed them to Jiraiya and said, have a good time. He then chuckled and said, don't do anything I wouldn't. Jiraiya scowled and said, I'm older than you. I'm an adult and so is she. Naruto looked at the shopkeeper and asked, do you know what you're getting yourself into? She smiled and replied, if he's a pervert then hopefully, yes. If not, then at least a pleasant night with a gentleman. Naruto shook his head and Sylvie said as the four kids left the shop, have fun. We're going to get a room at the inn. Jiraiya waved at them and began to talk to the shopkeeper. Naruto saw Motoyasu and his party coming back into the castle wall. He noticed that one of the girls wasn't happy and seemed to be annoyed at the group. He pulled Sylvie's arm and said, looks like there is trouble in paradise. She asked, what do you mean? He said, the fourth girl, the blonde. She doesn't seem happy to be in the group with the spear hero. Also, watch out for the retreat. She is the one I told you about. The other girls had been listening in and Raphtalia asked, should we follow them? Naruto nodded and said, that woman is always up to no good, so that girl might be in trouble. Sylvie kissed him on the cheek and said, my hero, but will there be enough of you to go around? Naruto blushed at the implications. The group followed the spear hero's group and they entered a building. About 10 minutes later 3 of the girls left with the fourth tied up and dragging her along. Naruto's eyes flashed purple and his canines grew. Sylvie looked on worriedly but followed along with her master. She had a feeling that one more would be added tonight. Naruto engaged a henge and changed into what looked like a noble and said, wait here. The girls nodded and knew this district to be the red light. He was able to enter the building just before the women from the spear hero's group. Naruto was talking to the master of the brothel and asked to buy a girl, just as Mine and the girls from the spear hero entered. Mine said, she is a slave and I can sell her to you for a gold coin. Naruto looked at the woman who was tied up and she looked frightened. He lifted her chin and looked into her eyes and showed an instant of sympathy. Only enough for her to catch it. She seemed to catch on and slacked. He looked her up and down and said, she will do fine as a concubine for me. I lack the ink for doing the exchange. Mine smiled and said, Andre, you can do it for him. Can you make sure that this woman will disappear? Naruto nodded and replied, she will not be seen again for a long time. So, 1 gold to you and 20 silvers for the transfer. Andre nodded and greedily rubbed his hands. He then replied, that would be fine sir. Naruto pricked his finger and dripped it into the dish with the ink. Andre dipped the brush and then ran it along the existing slave crest on her breast. She screamed through the gag. She fell to her knees and panted. Naruto handed Andre 20 silvers and gave Mine a gold coin. Mine and her friends left happily. Naruto picked the girl up bridal style and left the building. The girl had passed out. He made it to the girls and they cut the ropes. Naruto transformed back to himself. He carried his new slave back to the inn and asked the innkeeper, I would like a room with 2 beds please. The man smiled lecherously and said, of course sir. That will be 1 silver and 10 copper per night. Food not included. Naruto nodded and looked at Sylvie, who said, yes master. We will be staying for the week. She got out 7 silver and 70 copper. The girls then bowed and Sylvie said, thank you sir. The innkeeper just handed a key to Sylvie. The girls surrounded Naruto as they went to the room. It was a clean room with 2 beds. Naruto set the new girl on the bed and turned to the girls. He then said, time for haircuts for all of us. How would you like your hair to look? Sylvie replied, I would like it to be short somewhat like yours, but a girl's style. Naruto nodded. Raphtalia replied, I want it a little shorter than it is now, but still somewhat longer than the other girls. Naruto nodded. Lily replied, I want it at the shoulders or so if you could, master. Naruto nodded. Naruto started with Raphtalia, since hers would be the quickest to do. She smiled after looking in the mirror. She asked, do I look beautiful, Master Naruto? Naruto smiled and replied, of course. Lily was next. She was ecstatic about her hair. She didn't even ask. She just wrapped her arms around Naruto and kissed him on the lips. Naruto smiled and said, I guess you like it. She nodded. Naruto worked on Sylvie's hair and it took quite a while. Sylvie looked at the finished job Naruto had done and said, if I reward you the way I want to, I would get in trouble with Jiraiya. So, this will have to do. She kissed him and it lasted longer than it did with Millie. She then said, remember, I want to marry you. Naruto scratched his neck and said, well about that Raphtalia's friend, Rafana, also wants to marry me. She like Raphtalia is 10. Sylvie sighed and said, we will be fully grown soon, or at least have 18-year-old bodies soon. Naruto asked, but have your minds grown up enough from 10 and 11 to make those decisions? Or do you just think they have? Sylvie sighed and replied, I'm not sure. I guess we play this by ear. The girl on the bed began to wake up and her eyes went wide open. She exclaimed, "Please don't sell me into sex slavery." Naruto chuckled and said, "I just said that to confuse that bitch. She tried to screw up my life too. You're safe. We need to hide your identity. So, what is your name?" The girl looked around and saw 3 girls in the room and a young blonde man. She tentatively replied, "Reno, I'm a fighter with some magic." Naruto smiled and walked over to the woman. He extended his hand and said, "Welcome to the Shield Heroes party. You've got me, Naruto Uzumaki, 15, Chunin shinobi and shield hero, falsely accused of rape and still a virgin." This caused Reno to giggle. Naruto then points to Sylvie and continues the introduction, "Sylvie, bunny warrior, fire and water mage." He pointed at Raphtalia and said, "Raphtalia, raccoon warrior, illusionist in the making." And finally pointing at Millie, he said, "And finally, Millie, fire mage and illusionist in the making. Welcome Reno. To the band of misfits. Our missing comrade is Jiraiya, the ultimate pervert and teacher of all things shinobi." Reno looked at the group. They seemed competent. She looked at their levels and they all had higher levels than she did. She then asked, "Am I to become your sex slave?" Naruto paled and replied, "No. I just said that to get you away from that woman. She is the one who accused me of raping her." Sylvie giggled and said, "There will be no sex in this group for quite a while. I want to with Naruto Koi, but no, it would impede our growth. The other girls feel strongly about Master too." Reno blushed and said, "I'm sorry for assuming." Naruto chuckled and replied, "It is alright, but we need to change your look. You are a beautiful woman, but the quickest way to change your look is to cut your hair. The second would be to change the color, but that would be hard. I would also not want to try to start up your chakra. It might be dangerous." Reno looked at Naruto questioningly and asked, "Chakra?" Naruto smiled and replied, "Chakra is like mana, but different. I can use it to make other techniques." He held up his left hand and a blue sphere appeared. He then explained, "This is the Rasengan. An assassination technique. This will grind the target and destroy the target's insides. A very devastating attack. I can show you more types tomorrow, but I hate to say it, but I need to know how old you are." Reno replied, "I'm 20. Naruto smiled and said, "I would have to check with Granny to see if it would work with you or if it would even be safe for you." Millie was about the dividing line for how old you could be to have your chakra activated. "Do you notice the bar on the girls that is missing from your status?" Reno nodded and replied, "It is a different color." Naruto nodded and replied, "Yes, that is chakra. Millie has the least, while Sylvie has the third most. Jiraiya has second and I have the most. This week we will work on team training with you and get ready for the wave. You will not be in the way, but we need to figure out where you will fit into the team. I figure that you will help guard Millie and I will back up Sylvie and Raphtalia. We will work on large groups of balloons and then work on a large creature as a group so we can feel out how each of us works together. I have weakened attacks." Reno looked surprised and asked, "So you girls aren't going to just root him on and not do anything?" Millie giggled and replied, "He's the shield hero. His defense is outstanding, but his offense is rather weak, especially compared to what it should be. So, no. We work as a team and help each other to complete the work. He may run off to do something by himself, but he will make sure that we are safe enough. We are tough, but he makes sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew." Raphtalia smiled and said, "He also loves us and would never endanger us if he could help it, but his job is to save the world and we're going to help him." Sylvie slipped her arm into Naruto's and said, "He will save us and we will save him. So, do we color your hair or do we cut it?" Reno sighed and replied, "I guess we should do both, but what about my clothes? I need new clothes." Naruto smiled and replied, "We can shop for new clothes tomorrow. We need new armor and weapons anyway." Reno got up and hugged Naruto. She noticed him going rigid to her touch. She looked at him and saw the worry in his eyes. Sylvie replied, "He isn't used to affection. It has taken a month to get him this far. He almost runs scared if we are standing naked in front of him. He is afraid we will hit him." Reno wore a wondering look and asked, "Are you afraid of women?" Naruto replied, "Women can be scary." Sylvie guided Reno to the chair and Naruto began to cut the woman's hair. Sylvie whispered into her ear, "Do not hurt him. For he has loosened the slave settings. Jiraiya will not hesitate to kill you if you hurt his godson. Given time, Naruto will come to love you. If not as a lover then as a sister." Reno began to sweat and nodded. Naruto didn't notice the conversation between the two women. He ended up giving her a wavy baby doll Heim cut. The hair framed her face, giving her a different look. It didn't detract from her beauty but was different than before. Sylvie trimmed Naruto's hair. Naruto collected up all the hair and fed it to his shield. Sylvie and Millie took the bed with Naruto that night, while Raphtalia and Reno took the other. Naruto woke first, which was a first, but he found Sylvie on top of him. He smiled at the bunny ears shading his eyes from the early rays of the sun. Her head lifted and her green eyes looked into his blue. She whispered, we could have some fun before the others wake. Naruto smirked and reached around and grabbed her fluffy tail. He replied, you would be too noisy. He gently squeezed her tail and her face turned beet red. She then moaned loudly. He smiled and said, I'm sure that you would be louder if we went further. Her beet red face nodded and she buried her head in his chest. Millie looked at him and said, she is asking for sex again, isn't she? Naruto replied, yep, and we all know that we can't do that yet. I can't get you girls pregnant or hurt from sex just before the wave. Sure, it would be fun, but it would be disastrous in the long run. He looked at Sylvie and asked, had enough yet? She shook her head and grabbed his other hand. She then slid it in her top and said, please squeeze gently. Naruto by this time had already gotten a rise from the girl, but she wanted him to feel her up. So, he obliged. She bit into his shirt and moaned loudly. After a few minutes, she gasped and Naruto looked at the girl, who seemed satisfied. He pulled his hands away from her and asked, you really need to figure out how old you really are. I feel like I'm playing with a kid and Sylvie kissed him passionately and then said, I declare that I'm 18. We can wed when you reach 16. She then got up shakily from on top of Naruto. Lily giggled and said, I really think that she is going to get you after this wave sometime and before the next one. Naruto shook his head and replied, you may be right in that. I can't figure if it is the hormones or lust. Which would also be hormones of a different sort. Lily kissed him lightly on the lips and replied, you're just too irresistible. Also, when did you get so smart? Naruto blushed and pleaded, stop teasing me. Lily giggled and replied, Sylvie is teasing, but serious. Me, I'm serious, but teasing. I would love to be yours, but we have too much to do. Raftalia was wiping her eyes and said, did Sylvie try to get you again, Naruto-kun? Naruto nodded and replied, I couldn't really get too much attention from the girls in my world, but here. Raftalia giggled and said, they either accuse you of raping them or want to rape you. Naruto said as he got up, I would settle for somewhere in between. Rino got up and asked, girl trouble? Naruto chuckled and replied, something like that. In my world girls ignored me over another guy. Rino looked down and said, I thought the spear hero was a great guy. He asked me out and I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. His type always does. The company he keeps tells you more about him, Naruto explained. Rino nodded and said, that Redeed tricked me and had someone put a slave seal on me after our adventure outside. You came along and saved me. Well, you bought me. I don't have to have sex with you, do I? Sylvie returned in her adventure gear and replied, only if you want to. He won't force you to. It's not in his nature. He has a kind heart and while I want him, he has the willpower to keep me in line and not use the slave crest. This makes me love him even more. He and I do need to mature, but I do like to play with him and like it when he plays with me. Lily would be next in line and Raftalia would be last. She would be either lover or sister and can't figure out where she would want to be. Raftalia blushed as she put on her adventure gear and said, I have time to decide. He is cool and did save all of us. Naruto had taken off his shirt and his pants. He sealed them away. Rino watched intently and only understood that this young man was 15 when Millie said, his body is amazing for a 15-year-old. Isn't it? Rino blushed and said, I'm not sure what to say. The girls giggled and Naruto quickly dressed in a new outfit. He then said, sorry, I forgot you're new and well we sort of know each other's bodies rather intimately. Rino's eyes went wide and asked, what do you mean? Raftalia replied, we've seen each other in the nude for the last month. He's seen us grow from 10 and 11 in mine and Sylvie's case and 14 in Millie's case. Naruto explained, at first, it was more an accident, but the girls made it more of a thing. Especially in the last week, since they reached their 18-year-old bodies. More like they wanted to show off. He whispered the last part. Millie handed a dress to Rino to put on and said, admit it, you enjoyed it. I know we did. Naruto replied, most of the girls in my world would have beaten me to a pulp if I even tried to take a peek. These girls showed it off to me. On purpose. I tried to avoid it, but eventually, I decided to not fight it since it might hurt me if I said no to them. Sylvie ran a finger under his chin and asked, so you did like it? Naruto nodded and replied, what guy wouldn't? I'm just glad Arasanen didn't see it. Rino had just put on the dress given to her by Millie and a voice came from the door. You girls are still too young for me, but this one is on the borderline, Jiraiya said. Naruto said, this is Jiraiya, our other party member. Until we get info back from Granny Tsunade, we will not activate her chakra. I don't want to risk it. Jiraiya nodded and said, your call. Now we need to get some new equipment. What are our finances? Naruto pulled out a scroll and a bag appeared. Naruto then pulled out a smaller bag. He then quickly went through both bags and replied, 8 gold, about 300 silver and 20 copper. I'll travel to the weapon shop first and then you guys follow me, Jiraiya said. Naruto then said, first we need to get an outfit for Rino and change her hair color. Mine might recognize her without the hair change. Without chakra there is no way to change her appearance unless we want to use a seal, but that could have drawbacks. Jiraiya took a thinking pose and said, you're right. She's a blonde, a brunette would be enough of a change. I'm off. He left the room. The group left the room and Naruto changed his appearance again. Rino pulled the hood over her head and walked in the middle of the group. They came upon a hairdresser who did the hair coloring for 2 silvers. They then found the dress shop and the woman was enthusiastic about making an elegant dress for Rino. Naruto sighed and just asked for a utilitarian dress and would ask for 3 dress like that later after the wave. The woman had a dress done in about 10 minutes that was both functional and looked good for Rino. Naruto paid the 10 silvers and said that they would be back. The group made it to Earhart's shop and found him in a deep conversation with Jiraiya. I don't know if you confront him it will do any good. Only his daughters or the queen could rein him in. Ah, the group is here, not another girl, Earhart complained. Naruto chuckled and replied, what can I say? I'm a sucker for saving those in need. We need to equip her from the bottom up and some new weapons and some new equipment for the girls. I also need a new armor outfit, but one that isn't constraining. Earhart took a thinking pose and asked, how flexible are you? Naruto bent back and kicked his legs straight up. He then demonstrated a kata that would show his flexibility. Naruto then asked, does that tell you what you want? Earhart nodded and replied, and the girls? Naruto replied, they are not quite as flexible as I am, but are working on it. Girls, please let him know your preferences. Riftalia blushed and replied, I would prefer to have skirt since I don't do those kata and mine are more fist and less leg movements. Earhart nodded. Millie replied, being a mage and following Master Naruto's kata, I would prefer shorts or pants that afford me protection. A breastplate would also be helpful. Earhart nodded. Sylvie blushed and said, I need both protection and flexibility. I am a blend of what Riftalia and Millie. Earhart nodded. Rino looked at Naruto who nodded and hesitantly said, I'm mostly a fighter who uses magic. A cuirass would work with a battle dress. She then blushed and turned to Naruto and exclaimed, I'm sorry Naruto-sama. Naruto cocked his head and asked, why are you sorry? You need to be protected. The girls are higher level than you, so it is understandable that you get better protection. Rino bowed and exclaimed, but it costs so much, Naruto-sama. Naruto waved her off and said, we also need 3 magic steel swords and another kunai kit. Earhart chuckled and said, you treat your girls right and do your best to keep them safe. The cuirass I have, but can custom make to fit her better if you want. No extra cost. And you Master Jiraiya? The magic chain suit I asked for would be fine. The kunai set will be spread between the girls, Naruto, and I, Jiraiya replied. Earhart was counting on his fingers and said, that will be 557 silvers. Naruto pulled out 5 golds and 57 silvers. Rino began to tear up and Sylvie hugged her. She whispered, you see. He does care and will make sure that you're taken care of. Rino nodded and replied quietly, I see now. He isn't like that woman or the spear hero. Earhart explained, I'll have the custom stuff ready later today. We should fit her with a standby cuirass until you come back. I also need some supplies. Here is the list. I was hoping to make what I called barbarian armor, but it would be restrictive to your movements. I will edit some and make it so that it will be more to your style. Naruto chuckled and said, barbarian armor. Sounds awesome. We can call it that anyway. Since the king wants to make me a criminal then I will oblige him. He began to laugh and the others began to laugh with him at the king's folly. After Rino was fitted with a temporary cuirass the team went outside the castle wall. They found a large group of balloons and Naruto began to give orders. The first run didn't go well because the team wasn't used to having either Jiraiya or Rino there. Rino expected to be reprimanded but Naruto said, this is why I decided to go against a group of balloons. I wanted to find out where our teamwork was lacking. It is my fault as team leader for not compensating for a new person and reintegrating Arasanen. Now collect the pieces and we will do it again. This time I want Rino on the center right with Riftalia on the right. I want Jiraiya on the center left with Sylvie on the left with Millie right behind me in the center. This will be Alpha formation. The beta will be Millie in the center with Rino. Sylvie will be on point with Jiraiya on the left flank and Riftalia on the right and me in the back. Charlie formation will be me up front with Sylvie paired with me in the center. 5 meters to the right will be Jiraiya with Millie. While Riftalia and Rino are 5 meters to the left, Naruto explained. Rino held her head down and said, do you not trust me? Naruto shook his head and replied, no, we work in teams or groups of 2. I put experience with experience. The reason you're not with Jiraiya is that he doesn't have magic but is very experienced but not in our group. He does a lot of solo things before the wave. I want him with one of the members of the group who are with me all the time. Jiraiya chuckled and said, it says a lot that he trusts you with Riftalia. She has no magic right now but will be learning over the week. Just like I will. So, you have magic and Riftalia doesn't, that is why you're paired with her. Naruto isn't picking favorites with Sylvie. Their styles mesh well together. Now let's get back to training. The group went through 5 more balloon groups before Naruto seemed happy. They then moved to larger monsters. They ran into a group of bears and quickly took care of them. Naruto praised the group. The group headed back to the town and sold off their goods. They got about 60 silver for their troubles. They then stopped by Earhart's and the cuirass looked incredible on Reno. She broke down and cried at the sight of it. The fitting wasn't a problem and the group went to a tavern. They wore their new armor. Naruto now had a green and burnt orange outfit. It had plates of leather and steel over his vital locations, but not enough to interfere with his movements. It also gave him added protection. The next day Sylvie and Naruto paid the church a visit. He wanted to show her the Hergless. As he was leaving Motoyasu showed up. Is that Naruto? And who is this lovely girl? She can't be with you, he chided. Naruto raised an eyebrow and asked, why not? I prefer strawberry blondes to redeeds now. Less hassle. Shut up, you criminal. Mine exclaimed. Motoyasu went to kiss Sylvie's hand and she pulled it away and said, not interested. He was surprised but decided to barb Naruto. He then said, I would watch out for him, he might try something. Mine grinded her teeth and growled, damn Demi. Sylvie smirked and replied in a sultry voice, it's not him to be worried about. Naruto chuckled and asked, shall we leave? It's getting a little stuffy about here. Oh, hi Ran, it's Suki. You guys ready for the wave? Itsuki waved and asked in a confused tone, how are you doing Naruto? Naruto shrugged and replied, leveling and with my partner here. We are going to have protect everyone. Itsuki still seemed confused but replied, that's good. Ren scowled and said, don't get in my way. Naruto replied happily, okay, Sasuke-chan. Ren angrily asked, what did you say? Naruto turned and replied in a serious tone, you act just like the traitor to my village. I was always in his way. So, I will try to stay out of your way, but remember to stay out of mine and we can be happy rivals. Ren scowled and said, you're level 25 and I'm over 40, how can we be rivals? Naruto waved as he was leaving and said, never underestimate someone, especially one you think is weaker than yourself. Sylvie giggled at the exchange and waited until they were outside. She then asked, so do we get in their way or not? Naruto chuckled and replied, we will see. If lives are in danger then, yes. If not, let them figure out how to work together. I see a group that doesn't know the idea of teamwork. The pair met the rest of the group in the forest near the town and they continued to train up until the day of the wave coming. Elsewhere a dark figure slinked around the castle while the heroes were getting ready for the wave unnoticed by the king and his knights. What if Naruto was sent to Rising of the Shield Hero? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.